So let's see. Yep, we got a few people. There's people waiting till 1. So we got any questions? Got the legend himself here, waiting to talk about golf. Let's go. Mike, why don't we ask, let me ask you, over all of your time teaching teachers, what are the characteristics that differentiate teachers over the course of their career? You know, you see some for a day or two, whatever, but you see them over 10 years and you can sort of recognize who's going to be
the ones who have a hunger and thirst for knowledge, the ones who are never satisfied with where they're at, are the ones who become great teachers. You know, you have to have great communication skills. You have to want to be the best you can possibly be. I mean, first time I met you, Terry, you did no talking except for questions. The ones who try to impress you and to show you what their knowledge are the ones that don't know anything. And
yeah, it's interesting to me too, as people make statements rather than really ask questions. I think to add to what you just said there, Mike, I think the determination to make people better, right, is sort of a inbred thing. It's like do a good job, or so you've got to be a little bit, you know, selfish.
Yeah.
Did you ever do any research on the dominant eye, Mike, in the golf swing?
Yeah, we did with Craig Farnsworth.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what he said?
It didn't. It's a messy variable.
No.
The email, the recording from yesterday will come out quite soon. It took a long time to process. So, Mike, you got how many teachers get into the top 100 approximately over the years?
I don't know. I think they probably. I think what they had 12 last time. They have some years that 1 or 2 get in, and some years that 10 or 15 get in.
Yeah. I think the skill that is natural for good coaches is communication, which means both understanding what people are saying and also what you're saying to them being understood. Right. I think the metaphor of the radio show is sending out on the radio at 98.4 and you're receiving on 97.2. Doesn't matter how good the information is, right? So I think that's the thing that people need to learn, is to dose and deliver the information according to the radio station that the person has versus what, it's very exciting to have all this new knowledge and ideas and things, but it only goes in at the rate that the person can receive.
Right. Most learning is fire hose. They just blast it and you see how much you can swallow.
That's funny. Kind of like Sasha's bucket and hose metaphor, right? So
that
you
was
have
good.
a bucket, but at the end of the day, if your hose is too hard, then it just bounces out.
Or bounces off their heads.
There's a few fire hoses out there.
How many times have we told somebody something and that it did not penetrate their brain, it just pounced off their forehead?
I think people that watch you, Mike, you make it.
They don't throw up anymore. It's a lot better. They're not getting motion sickness.
The people that watch you, I mean, they go home with a bag full of new jokes, right? So I think the things that we run into on a regular basis, I think you have to know how to make a joke about it or laugh it off, because humans are pretty consistent in that.
When you're working with a student, they have to enjoy the experience. I mean, if you give them the best information in the world, but it's it's like watching paint dry, they don't really benefit from it. You have to let them. I learned something very important early in my career. I watched Jim Flick give a golf lesson, and Jim, the information I didn't think was otherworldly, but the delivery was spectacular. And then Ben Doyle gave great information, but it was very dry and unenjoyable. So the more fun you can make them allow them to have, the better. They want to have fun. They want to enjoy the experience. They're there for an experience.
I think the other thing that I recognize when I teach and when I watch other people teach successfully is because we all have some lessons that are better than others, is recognizing when the person actually is asking for help, right? I mean,
Right.
you have to sort of wait or keep them busy until they really say, can you help me with whatever? Was that Chardonnay?
No, it is Topo Chico.
Oh, so disappointing. So, when someone's talking and, you can deliver your information much more efficiently if you go, soon they hit 10 balls and the 10th one, they go, oh my God, I hate that shot. That's the one that really gets me. Now you've got them versus teaching at them, So I think, communication, I think that's something that needs to evolve in our industry. I mean, it's very much a what and not very much how. I think, people are starting to probe a little bit with, the motor learning and sort of how to practice and things like that. But I think the human to human interaction is still the thing that differentiates the great teachers from the also
Eric
rounds.
wants to know about Martin Keimer, if his wingspan is longer, which it is, and he is front post. That was, he asked what post is he in, what does he have longer wingspan? He has a side cover elbow, but he sometimes grips it side on, but when he moved the right hand on top, all of a sudden golf became easier for him.
Yeah. It's like we talked about with Rory, right? He tests out pretty close to side, and at points in his career he's been really on top. So I said to him, so you probably don't hook it very much, do you? He says, I hit it left 1 in 1,000 shot.
Well, when I put the club in his hand with the right hand more on top,
yeah,
we kept moving it until he got it, and it quit closing with it
a
lot more on top than he grips it. And he goes, that I like.
So quite long forearm, right? So he's
he's got long forearm, longer arms.
Yeah. So he plays best from either a close stance or he just hits cuts, which is what he really does. He fades every ball.
Yeah.
So you don't have to close someone up if they're happy fading it.
Yeah. Well, you can close him. He closes a little bit so it can get down the line.
Right.
But he's pretty. He was impressive. I like to see him come back.
Oh, I watched him the other day. It's so matched up. I think it's really fun to watch. So I think really the question is with long arms, long forearm, how does he use his laterals, as a front post?
There isn't much lateral. You close the stance so they move more diagonally.
Yeah.
And that you use as a slot the golf club, and then you're. In fact, Duffy's going to talk about that today.
Mm-hmm. He has a shallower and that he releases it, a little earlier as well.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't. So his, he delivers a lot of loft and, gets forward to sort of cover it. I bet that's sort of a shallowing move on some level. So, all right. Well, here we are.
When he was playing his best, I thought he was one of the best ball strikers I ever saw.
Oh, it's so good to watch.
The year he won the Open and he won the Players, he hit it pure.
Mike, you want to talk briefly about double peak?
Double peak.
Maybe you can talk about when we were in Arizona, we saw the 4 peaks.
Yeah, that was new. It was a matter of them trying to stay in posture, and when you get them to release their body and come up through the shot, the double peak disappears, and they start hitting the ball pure. Yeah, when we did that, all of a sudden their verticals went way up because they weren't utilizing it so much in one thing. I mean, I don't have to stay down at impact. No.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the things that Sasha was talking about yesterday was really intriguing and very much in line with what we talk about. I mean, he used a single joint, and he said if your joint is stiff, it should be whatever extending, but it isn't because it's stiff and therefore the muscles working against each other. I think you can expand that theory and say most golfers have got body parts working against each other, right? And
Right.
so I think what we're always trying to do is make sure that the movements are lined up so that they're able to, release and not fight each other. So I think that's part of the speed gain is taking the brakes off. And one of the big breaks that people have to that point is they're trying to keep the butt against the wall, which really doesn't serve any
Which is what
dynamic purpose.
Matt Wolf is working on, keeping the butt against the wall, and he's trying to get this bowed. And my advice to him was look at your videos from 2018, 19, and 20.
Yeah.
If you see that in there, then copy it. But if they don't, I said all the answers are right there.
Yeah, that's another thing that we talk about a lot. I'm just trying to think about the things that we cover on a regular basis. Is when we teach players that have had some success in their career, even regular golfers can look back and say, I want to play like I did last summer or whatever. Then having some videos and some idea of what they did at their best is the easiest way back, right? Because they're familiar. And I think, generally elite, quote unquote, elite instructors these days, impose a methodology as opposed to wisdom.
Right.
So that's something we
want to get rid of inhibitors.
Yeah. So we've tried to cover every aspect in terms of increasing distance. So we've talked a lot about increasing speed. So decreasing braking, increasing, ground forces. Sasha talked about increasing muscle force. Obviously club fitting. Thank you to Ping, because that was a really terrific presentation by Eric, and they did a lot of great work there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one piece missing, I think, Mike. If you you talk to generally the golf industry and say, well, how do I hit it further? I think one of the first things they do is tell you hit up on it. So I got a little video here for 10 minutes just on how different styles tend to hit up. I'm not sure if I say it in the video, but
you and I already know about all this.
Yeah, so on top golfers a million times. On top golfers will tend to swing left of their aim, and if you make them hit it up, then you basically confuse the game immeasurably for their trail arm. Whereas under golfers will tend to hit up on it more naturally. So a couple of different setup positions that we can adapt to help each person hit up on it, but still make good square center face contact. So Chris, why don't you play the hitting up on it video here, and we'll be back to introduce the rest of the day.
The big thing that launch monitors taught us early on is that if you hit up on the ball, it enables you to, de-loft your driver, so we can get a high launch and low spin. There's absolutely no doubt, all other things being equal, that's the way to hit it the farthest. Unfortunately, Mike, in my experience is that depending on how your assessment goes, you are more predisposed to hit down or up depending on how you hold the club primarily, and then there's some secondary factors. So let's just talk about attack angle and the testing that we do. So if you test, more of an on-top golfer, the way the elbow works is more, it goes up and back like this. Think of someone like a, Brooks Koepka, for example, or Rory McIlroy, or Patrick Reed. Now, the thing is, if we go very, very simplistically and say that the product of this test is that your hand is oriented in this direction, therefore the hand will hinge in this direction and the arm will push more, sort of down and around. You can see that pretty clearly by just putting your hand on there this way, swinging the club back and through. That arm wants to release, naturally more down and around. So that's me, for example. So when I drive the ball with a level stance, let's say, then, let's see what we got here. So I hit down on that one 1 degree, launched it like 9.8. So that would be like my stock driver, let's say. Now, of course, I can hit it further by hitting up on it more. But what happens is, if you watch the previous video about counter tilt and counter swivel, if a side cover golfer who needs some counter tilt needs to stay on top of the ball, then leans to the right, the club folds up incorrectly for their style, and they can no longer easily square the face or deliver force. So despite the gain, you know, in the geometry of flight, potentially the smash factor, low loft, you know, high attack angle, lower spin loft, the cost is that, you know, for me personally, I just talk from my experience, if I counter swivel, you know, I'll either flip the face or hold it off and get a lot of heel hits. So, you know, club head speed is actually the number one variable that contributes to ball speed. Secondly, if you have somebody who's an under golfer, you know, naturally they're going to rotate the club behind them so it comes out shallower. They're going to get a little bit more behind the ball, more counter swivel. They're going to get the elbow in front of the hip. Then naturally they'll have a more sort of a push back force, and naturally will hit up and out to the right. Again, if you look at the way the hand folds, it folds to the inside, up to the outside. Guys like Dustin Johnson and, you know, Luke Donald, some other guys that, you know, tend to hit high draws, Corey Connors. Now, Dustin Johnson sets that, you know, he normally swings this way, let's say, but he aims more to the left, so he's a little bit and more at the target. So, the point of this video is to say, we completely agree that all people should hit up if they want to max out their distance. What we're saying with this video, what I'm saying here, is that if you get a side cut, or even maybe a side-on golfer who wants to hit up more, and you tell them to put their ball more forward, tee it up higher and lean to the right, you've just ruined, you know, probably about, I want to say about 66% more, probably 75, 80% of the population of golfers. So, you know, the ball position is also related to the grip style. So grip is one component of ball position. So by having an on-top grip and the, you know, releasing more around the corner, then the ball position has to be back in order to match our sort of contact point. Somebody who's more of an under golfer, the club's working up and out away from them, ball position needs to be a little bit more forward. So what's the solution? So for an on-top golfer, to hit it a little bit higher, I've already teed the ball up a little bit here. I'm going to pull my right foot back. Now this is very important to sustain our counter tilt, or my counter as a side cover golfer. I'm center post, so just relational sort of counter tilt. If I was front post, I'd be more to use vertical and a closed stance to shallow out. So here we go. So I'm going to close up my stance. My job is to make sure I stay on top of the ball and don't hang back. And then as a consequence, so that launched at 12 degrees. And I hit 3 degrees up on it. I had no swing changes. It was just purely a product of teeing it a little higher, closing the stance, which effectively puts the ball up in the stance a little bit more. And it locks up the leg, which releases just a little bit more loft. So, point being, if I or any side cover or even side on golfers, you know, leans back, puts the ball forward, and just through determination tries to hit up, you lose the face. Under golfers could do the opposite. So, you know, if the under golfer wanted to negate how much they're swinging out and up, hit the ball a little bit lower. It's kind of how we play a fairway finder. Then they'll tee it down lower, pull the left foot back. This one's going to go pretty low for me, and then from there just send it. So that is basically the way I play a fairway finder. But now, you know, for me that launched at what was that, 8.9, and it was down 2 point something. So basically the lesson is different grips need to act using the right foot back or left foot back to change attack angle. Ball position is different for the different golfers. Under is much more up on the shoulder. On top brings it back to the shirt logo. You know, the culmination of all the other factors has a small effect on that too, but grip is at least half of ball position. So under golfers feel free to what we call give them a K setup, so they're allowed to be in this sort of, you know, by putting my body here, I already naturally grip it more under. So that sort of K, get behind the ball, high tee, you know, a lot of club fitters like that position. It's good for some amount under golfers. I call this the T pose. So the way I actually help people get their grip on there better is take the right hand over, take your setup, shoulders feel more level. They're not, they're always going to be a little bit tilted, but feel more level, shaft's more level. Now you drop the right foot to get the attack angle from there. Again, you know, excessive side bend is an absolute killer, golf killer for golfers. You know, the occasional hot one from hanging back is fun, but not really a good way to play the game. So 100% agree, hitting up on it is the way to max out your distance. Side cover golfers need to pull the right foot back, tee it up a little bit higher. Yeah. Additionally, allow themselves to launch. Under golfers can play, you know, from square stance and more of a K setup, which naturally sets them up for that sort of out and up to the right swing direction, which is optimal for their, you know, the way their arm folds and delivers. Let's go for some bombs. Oh, very good. The second thing which really affects attack angle on the club is sort of explains how Rory hits up on it so much because he's a side under. The more external rotation you have, basically, you know, it lays the club down and has the effect of swinging it out to the right and up on the ball more. So somebody like you know, Rory, Cameron Champ, we think Hogan, we haven't dug him up yet. Sergio Garcia, you know, potentially from where they swing it to, they should really be reasonably kind of steep on the ball. But they'll tend to, you know, externally rotate more. People with less external rotation are going to hit down on the ball. So the effect is really, it's the same as the grip. You know, you're going to pull your right foot back more if you're lacking external rotation to increase the attack angle. And if you have a lot of external rotation and you actually want to decrease it, you know, to bring the flight down, for example, then you can pull the left foot back. So you can combine those factors. You know, you could have a plus and a minus and you end up neutral. So you could, for example, have a, you know, a on top hand and a lot of external rotation. So you're probably going to deliver a level delivery. Some with a strong grip but less external rotation, you know, they sort of negate each other as well. So, you know, in that case, you know, quite often we'll actually play from a slightly closed stance in that case because the shoulder is really, really important in this particular case. So that's the second and you know, second most important kind of contributor to attack angle. The third is really, you know, how much, you know, somebody pushes up. So a lot of people, they'll, you know, like Rory's another example of two out of three gigantic up attack angle variables. You know, you get somebody loading really well like him and pushing up, you know, so his legs are really straight through impact, his heels are almost coming off the ground. That's really going to, you know, shallow, it's going to release the club and it's going to shallow the angle of attack. So pushing up or, you know, staying down, that would be sort of the third one I'm going to highlight here. So three real things that, you know, eventually have an effect on the attack angle. So again, longest shots are going to be when you hit up on it. How the person hits up on it is very much a product of their body makeup.
It's a good example of why you should have good footwear there. I was almost blew my back out with a slip because I had my my trainers on. It's pretty funny. So who let's see there. Any thoughts to add to that, Mike?
No, those are good. That's pretty much what we talk about all the time.
Yeah. So today we've got Dr. Kwon. He's going to be talking about kinetics and kinematics. So all the variables from motion capture and force plates that most highly correlate to speed, clubhead speed, which we're excited to listen to. I've heard some great snippets from that.
You and I had it's been a great day with him.
He's a very intelligent man. Really looking forward to hear Mike Duffey's presentation about personalizing ground reaction forces. He's taking a position, which we're excited, that they're really non-negotiable. You can't teach different people different ground reaction force styles, which is cool. We've got David Edel talking about how he uses testing, you know, not only to coach putting and wedging, but he also used it to design his wedges. So it's pretty cool to listen to that. I've got a video coming up, which is sort of commentating as I'm teaching, just sort of talking through the process. And then we'll end up with any other business, Mike. We'll answer as many questions as people can come up with. I got one question from Paul Wayland. I mentioned that the center of the pelvis and center of the torso translate together. That's linear motion. And Phil was discussing the X factor, which is rotational motion. So it's possible to have an X factor stretch, which is a rotational differential between the upper body and lower body, and for them to be moving linearly at the same time. So that's 2 different degrees of freedom. So, the sports box, for example, AMM, they measure 6 degrees of freedom. So it's 3 translations, side to side, forward and backward, up and down. That's translation. And rotation. So, upper body would be, rotation, side bend, forward and backward bend. So it's 2 different variables that are happening simultaneously. And that's the tricky thing in understanding, 3D motion capture. But Mike, when we teach, it's interesting how when you teach a single variable to somebody, sometimes it retards as in slows down their ability to do other things, right? And that's why we like the 3 swing drill. When we talk about the 3 swing drill that we do, a lot of these days really to try and teach people in motion as opposed to, taking a single thing.
Well, basically, the 3 swing drill, we use it to set up stance. We have them swing the club 5 times back and forth, full swing, then check your feet, and your feet will always move to a position that is best for balance and power. We do the same thing for tempo. They will find their natural tempo. We do this, the swing drills just so they can find where the club goes. I mean, they're no longer guiding it. There is motion, so the club swings it freely and goes back on its correct plane, releases properly. It's multi-purposes. We use it for everything.
I use it a lot for teaching ground forces or teaching ground force sequencing, because a lot of people, they'll think about their legs and they'll shut their arms down, right? So I'll make sure they keep swinging as they're thinking about their lower body. So there's a question from Ricky. He says, what kind of drills do you have for side cover players that used to open the club face and the takeaway and roll the forearms?
Well, we've got that, what is it? The grip, the Garmin, what grip is it called? It's a putting grip. We put it on there.
Oh, the Garson. Yeah, that's right.
The Garson?
Garson, yeah. We got the paddle drill. I mean, the paddle drill is a winner. I actually got it in this video that's coming up later. It's the steering wheel, just trying to feel it as you turn. I look at it like you've got 2 cogs working against each other, and in a side cover, the steering wheel's going left as the body's going right.
I mean, there's a lot of drills. We have them swing down. We have them swing down the slope. Down slopes. There's a whole bunch of different drills we use. We will put together a drill package and send it to everybody.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I talk about one-piece takeaway, like sort of a active body, passive shaft early. A lot of people that roll it don't move their body and just kind of roll the club open. So
also, I'll play a board behind the golf club and have them push the board back. They can't fan it open then.
Yeah.
I have to keep it hooded.
Yeah. See, Mike, teaching is learning twice. That was a great one. I'm going to use that. Someone using body track but not swing catalyst. So basically, you'll see pressure shift. Mike, what would you see on pressure shift that you can use to teach with?
Well, watch the shift move to the from the heel to the ball of the left foot. As long as they can get the pressure that way, things are going to be a lot better, because that's going to help slot the golf club. That's going to help them load it properly and stuff. Body track is a nice tool, but tell them that they're going to invest in their game. And as a teacher, they need to invest themselves and get a 3D force plate, whether it's GASP, swing catalyst, or smart to move. All 3 are terrific.
Yeah, it really it makes their life easier.
Yes.
Mike, you want to talk about final question until later? I mentioned that the elbow trumps the hands in the trail arm screen.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
Well, you can have if the elbow goes back and up, regardless of what the hand is, it's always going to be a cover grip. And if the elbow tucks in, regardless of what the hand is, it's always going to be an under grip. If you go back and they're probably questioning about the ones that hit the seam and the hands are a little bit down, that's still going to be, if you have a question, put the club in their right hand and start them in neutral. And if the face is still closing, work it till it finds a place where the face is quiet and stabilizes. And it's real simple. I mean, the answers are all in if you can't understand what the elbow is, put it in their hand and maneuver the grip till you find the one that works.
That's it. So thank you, Mike. Some good answers there. We've got Dr. Kwon, who developed his own software, uses force plates and motion capture, and has been doing some good work there in Dallas. We're very excited to get together with him soon to do some more research and learn more.
He's a brilliant man.
This is a
brilliant man.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet all of you virtually through this session. My name is Young-Hoo Kwon. I'm currently with the Biomechanics Laboratory at Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. Here's my contact information. And then I also have Instagram and YouTube channel. So if you want to see my activities, then you can visit these places. Before I start the class, I'd like to thank Mike and Terry for giving me this opportunity. My presentation title today is Club at Speed, a Big Picture Approach. So essentially what I did was I ran a series of correlations between the club at speed, particularly focusing on the driver, with the swing factors in different areas, such as body center of mass motions, pelvis motions, thorax motions, and on-plane rotational motions of the body, kinematic sequences, the ground reaction forces, and the ground of torques, and the center of pressure shifts. So the purpose here is, by running correlations against the club at speed, we'll be able to build a big picture. So showing which factors are correlated to a club at speed. So based on those factors, we'll be able to build a big picture of what are the key factors in developing club at speed. So let's start, and I'll go over these areas one by one, and then only introduce the factors which show a significant correlations to club at speed. But before I get into the details, let me first explain the swing events, because I will use these terms quite often. So I think it will be the best if I introduce these front. So first, the BA stands for breakaway, or this is the beginning of the backswing. And then top of backswing, this is the club transition point. And BI, ball impact, this is the most important instant in golf swing. And then I have three mid events. So this is mid backswing, mid downswing, and here mid follow through. So when I say mid something, that means the club is parallel to the ground. So the shaft is parallel to the ground. And then I have this late backswing, early downswing, and the late follow through. So I'm using late or early for these. These are when the club is vertical in the frontal view. So, and then this is called the late because this happens after the mid event. But the early downswing is called early because it is before the mid event, and then late follow through here. And also, I have arm-based late backswing and arm-based early downswing. So at these instances, the lead arm becomes parallel to the ground. And then EPR, this is the end of pelvis rotation. And between EPR and the top of backswing, I define this phase as the transition phase. So the pelvis shows the transition first, and then the club is the last. And between these two, so we'll have end of thorax rotation, end of shoulder rotation, and end of arm rotation. And also between top of backswing and the EDA, typically we will have the maximum cocking event. So this is actually beginning of the uncocking, wrist uncocking. And then right after impact, we'll have a zero cocking when we lose cocking completely. So these are typically the events I use frequently. So keep these in mind. Okay, then let's go through these different areas. The first one is body center of mass motion. And as you can see here, during the swing, this red dot is the body center of mass, but it is moving. So essentially, this is the average pattern of 66 male elite golfers. Elite golfers means college players, teaching pros, and then tour players. So what we see here is, in terms of the horizontal motion, the center of mass initially moves away from the target, and then eventually toward the target. So in the horizontal direction, largely we have away motion followed by the toward motion. And as you can see here, the toward motion starts from here. Event 3 and event 4 is the late backswing. So when the club becomes vertical in the front view. So from that point on, the body center of mass starts moving toward the target. I call it the recentering. So recentering starts during the backswing. And then this is the high point, which is end of pelvis rotation, typically around end of pelvis rotation. And top of backswing is here. So before we reach top of backswing, the recentering starts quite early. And in terms of the vertical motion, so we have initial upward motion from here to this high point. And then from this high point to this low point, this is downward motion. And then from this low point to the position at impact. So we have another upward motion during the downswing. And then these two with this asterisk here, these show significant correlation to club speed. Interestingly, the horizontal motion, horizontal motion ranges do not show any correlation to club speed. But among the vertical motions, this downward motion and the upward motion toward the end of the downswing show significant correlations to club speed. So only the vertical motions of the body center of mass show significant correlations. And particularly, these are directly related to the vertical ground reaction forces. So I'll add another diagram here. But this one shows the vertical ground reaction force. The forces acting on the body from the ground. So this green line shows the force acting at the leader foot. And then the blue is the force acting on the trail foot. And then the red line is a total vertical ground reaction force. And then at this high point here, which is this one here, the force is actually less than the body weight. So this is called the unweighting phase. So when the vertical ground reaction force is less than your body weight, then it is called unweighting. And then followed by this active push, where the vertical ground reaction force is way bigger than the body weight. But anyways, this downward motion here, how much you move downward, this is directly related to the area here, okay, or this area. These two areas are actually equal to each other. But the area during this unweighting phase and this area during the active push, these should be equal to each other. So if you have a large area here, then you will drop your body center of mass more. So in order to have, in order to increase this area, then you have to have a good unweighting, toward the end of the backswing and then slight early downswing here. And then this upward motion is associated with this area. So the area under the red line here and this low point. So basically, again, the vertical motion of the center of mass is directly related to your interaction with the ground in the vertical direction. And then the next one is a pelvis motion, but it is a linear motion. In other words, this is the motion of the center of mass of the pelvis. We can come up with the three motions. First, forward backward motion, and then toward and away motion. So toward the target and away from the target, and the up and down motion here. But among these, I will mainly look at the frontal plane motion of the pelvis center of mass again. So if you look at the pelvis center of mass motion in the frontal plane, that basically shows this pattern. Again, this is the average of 66 golfers. But generally, what we see again is in the horizontal direction, we have this away motion, and then followed by this toward motion. And then along the vertical direction is mainly downward and then upward. But again, in the motion of the pelvis, there's the horizontal motions or horizontal motion ranges do not show significant correlation to cleavage speed. Only the vertical motions, this downward motion and upward motion of the pelvis show significant correlations to cleavage speed. Again, these are directly related to the leg actions here, or the vertical interaction with the ground so that we saw earlier. So interestingly, in terms of the linear motion, only the vertical motions show a significant correlation to cleavage speed. The next one is the angular motion of the pelvis. In other words, the rotational motion of the pelvis. Before I look at the graphs here, first let me explain what these angles are. So let's imagine we have a horizontal plane passing through the left hip here. And then we can define the hip line here, which is connecting both hips from the left hip to the right hip. So this is the main axis in the pelvis. Then we can project this axis to the horizontal plane like this. So when we project this axis to the horizontal plane, that we can already define two angles. So the first angle is the rotation angle here. So how much this axis rotates on the horizontal plane. The second angle is the so-called right and left tilt angle. So if the left side is lower than the right side, it's called the left tilt. When the right side is lower than the left side, it's called the right tilt. But by just using the pelvis axis here, the hip line, we can already define these two angles. And then the third angle is rotation about the hip line or the pelvis axis here. So essentially, we have three different rotational motions of the pelvis, and then these angles show those. And here are the graphs. So the red line here shows the rotation angle. And first, the pelvis will show right rotation, followed by left rotation all the way to impact. And among these, the left rotation range shows a significant correlation to a cleavage speed. And then the second angle is the tilt angle. So left tilt first, and then right tilt. But these ranges do not show any correlation to cleavage speed. And then likewise, for the backward tilt, first the backward tilt of the pelvis, followed by forward tilt, and then backward tilt again. But these angle ranges, these tilt ranges, show no significant correlation to cleavage speed. So in terms of the rotational motion of the pelvis, only the rotation angle, particularly the left rotation, shows a significant correlation to cleavage speed. And then note that this rotation angle is defined on the horizontal plane because of this angle convention here. The next is the thorax rotation motion. And then this shows some interesting trends. But first of all, you have to see how the angles are again calculated. The way I calculate the angles is different from the typical method. So first, again, let's define a horizontal plane that passes through the so-called mid trunk point. And then this is the forward axis, and then this is the direction to the target. And then for the thorax, again, we can define the main axis, which is this one here. So from the mid trunk point to mid shoulder. So we'll use this as the main axis of the thorax. And then we can also project this to the horizontal plane. So when we look down, then this line appears here. Okay. So with this, we can define two angles. The first one is a toward away lean direction. So the direction of this line here currently shows the away direction, but it can swing to this side here, which is a toward lean direction. So this is the first angle. The second angle is the lean angle. So you have we have a forward and backward lean, but we only have a forward lean during the swing. And then the third angle again is about this axis here. So I will call it right and left rotation. So by using these three angles, we can accurately describe how the thorax rotates during the swing. And this is very different from the typical approach, which uses rotation, bend, and side bend. Okay. So with that, if we compute all the angles, the one thing we can see here is that the lean angle basically does not change at all. So generally, this angle here, the lean angle maintains throughout the entire swing. And also the lean direction shows not much difference, not much change during the backswing and then first part of the downswing. But then only later, toward the impact, you will see this big angle here. So in general, again, the lean direction does not change much up until this point here. So basically, thorax swing is, particularly the thorax motion is mainly axial rotation about the thorax axis, as you can see here. The only angle that changes predominantly is the rotation angle. So basically, we can characterize the thorax motion as axial rotation with a little bit of precession of the thorax axis. So this change in lean direction shows a precession of the axis. And here we see a lot more significant correlations to clever speed. So the first angle here is the lean direction. And then initially, we'll start with slightly away alignment. And then during the backswing, we'll go to toward alignment. And then a later part of the backswing, we have a lot of, again, away alignment. And this angle range, motion range from here to here, and then here to here. So the toward turn range and then away turn range. And also these peak positions. So this position and this position, these all show significant correlations to clever speed. And then for the rotation angle, a similar trend is observed here. So you will see right rotation first and then left rotation, both rotation ranges, right rotation, left rotation, and also the rotated positions. The most right rotated position here, and then position at impact. These all show significant correlations to clever speed. So the larger the rotation ranges are, the higher the clever speed is. And particularly when the lean direction goes to more toward alignment, then you will see the so-called reverse pivot alignment of the thorax. So from the beginning to this peak here, you will see some swing of this line here and toward the toward alignment. And then let's move on to the on-plane angular motion of the body parts. Before we talk about the on-plane motions, let me first briefly talk about the so-called inclined axial chain system. So if we look at the body parts above the pelvis, so pelvis here, and then all the trunk segments, and then the shoulder girdles, arms, and the club, then basically we can simplify the motion of these parts as motion of inclined axial chain system. So we have a multi-segment axle here, consisting of pelvis, abdomen, thorax, and the shoulder girdles. And then we have an open chain. Basically, the upper lever is formed by the shoulder girdle, thorax, shoulder girdles, and the arms. And then the lower lever is the club. And then the hub is located in the mid-trunk area because if you look at the swing plane, this is the so-called functional swing plane, but this is actually calculated from the club head motion. And this is the swing plane here, and it is passing through the midsection of the trunk. So I defined the hub to be at the midsection of the trunk. And this line is not an actual body segment. It's actually formed by the thorax, shoulder girdles, and the arms. But basically, the motion of this line shows the relative motion of the hands to the trunk. And I call this the upper lever, and then the club is the lower lever. So basically, we have a double pendulum structure here. And this is called the functional double pendulum, which is a bit different from the original double pendulum model introduced by Cochrane and Stubbs. Now, so if you look at this diagram here, this green arrow shows the axis rotation of the thorax, and then red arrow is the axis rotation of pelvis. So these are fairly close to the axis perpendicular to the swing plane. So in other words, we can describe the rotational motions of these body parts or the axial chain system by using the functional swing plane here. So if we look at the rotation motions of these parts on the swing plane, it looks like this. So first, this red line shows the upper lever, and then this is the club, the lower lever. And then these balls here show the location of the hub. The hub moves during the swing, and then we have the upper lever and then lower lever. And then as the swing progresses, you will see that the upper lever rotates around the hub, and then the lower lever also rotates around the hinge or the wrist center here. And then these blue lines here show the rotation of the pelvis or the hip line, and then these red lines show the rotation of the shoulder line. So we can fairly well describe the rotation motion of the axial chain system on the swing plane here. So based on that, we can also run some correlations against the collider speed. So first, let's look at the motion of the shoulders and hips. So this is the hip line connecting the two hips here, and then this is the shoulder line connecting the two shoulder joints. And at this position here, we'll see this hip line angle and then this shoulder line angle. But basically, we can describe the rotation of the hips and shoulders using the hip line angle and shoulder line angle. And that the pattern looks like this. So first, if you look at the hip line, let's first look at the shoulder line motion here. So this shows the backward rotation in the backward direction. And then from here to here, it's a downward rotation. And then this transition point is called the end of shoulder rotation. And then the pelvis or the hip line shows a similar motion. So basically backward rotation up to this point. And this is the end of pelvis rotation. And then from here to here, downward rotation. So we have two distinct phases. When we look at the hip line motion, so it will show first the right rotation and then the backward rotation followed by downward rotation. And then these motion rotation ranges here and also the peak rotated positions, these all show significant correlations to cleavage speed. So in other words, if you rotate the hip line more, then you tend to have a higher cleavage speed. And if you recall the pelvis motion earlier, when we looked at the pelvis rotation in 3D, only the left rotation showed a significant correlation to cleavage speed. But now the backward rotation and downward rotation both show significant correlations. And this is because this rotation of the hips reflect the combination of the pelvis rotation and the lateral tilt, right, left tilt. So if you have a good combination of rotation and tilt, then you will have a good amount of rotation on the swing plane. So that's why when we look at looking at the rotational motion on the swing plane makes a lot more sense. So we see the pelvis motion or the hip line rotation shows several significant correlations to cleavage speed. And then the same thing goes to the shoulder line rotation. So first it will show a backward rotation followed by downward rotation, both rotation ranges and then the peak positions. The peak position here, but not the position at impact. Okay? So these three are the two rotation ranges and then this peak rotation position. These show significant correlations to cleavage speed. But in general, both the hip line rotation and shoulder rotation show significant correlation to cleavage speed. And here, one thing I want to sort of highlight is the so-called X factor and the X factor stretches. So the rotational separation or the torsional separation between the shoulder line and the hip line is called the X factor. So the X factor shows this kind of pattern here. So it will increase throughout the backswing, but depending on the style, you will see a change in the slope here. Some will show more, more horizontal pattern here, but some will show a continuous increase in the X factor. And this is the X factor at the end of pelvis rotation. This is at the top of backswing, and then this is the maximum X factor. Again, these X factors are all calculated on the functional swing plane. And then the difference between the X factor at EPR and the top of backswing, this is called the backswing stretch. This is my definition. So it's a backswing stretch. And between the X factor at the top of backswing and the maximum value here, this difference is a downswing stretch. And then when you add both, then you'll be the total stretch. So we can find the X factor values at these different events, and including the maximum. And also we have these stretches. But interestingly, there's no significant correlation against the cleavage speed. So this is quite interesting because earlier we saw the rotation of the hip line and the shoulder line individually, and then they showed many significant correlations. But when you will look at the separation between the two lines, no significant correlation against the cleavage speed in elite male golfers. So the message here is that don't be obsessed with the separation between the two. Anyways, let's move on. Then the next one is the upper level angle and the wrist cock angle. So the upper level angle is measured from this vertical line to this upper level position here. So currently, we're looking at the upper level angle and the wrist cock angle at the ED, early downswing, when the club is aligned vertically upward. So this angle serves as the upper level angle. And then the angle between the upper level and the lower level is called the wrist cock angle. So when we look at the patterns of these two angles here, first the upper level angle, which is the blue line here. So it shows a backward rotation first, and then downward rotation. So backward rotation followed by downward rotation. Here, the rotation ranges, both the backward and the downward rotations. And then this is the maximum rotated position. These all show significant correlation to cleavage speed, but not the rotation position at impact. When we look at the cocking and the uncocking ranges, so cocking increases from here to here. This is maximum cocking. And then this is the uncocking range from here to impact. But both cocking and uncocking ranges show no significant correlation to cleavage speed. And also the maximum cocking here shows no significant correlation to cleavage speed. It is because when you introduce wrist cocking during the backswing, there are many different styles. Some introduce cocking early, and then some at the end. So because of the difference in cocking styles, so we don't see any consistent trend here. That's why we don't see a correlation, significant correlation to cleavage speed. So, but anyways, again, the upper level, which basically shows a rotation of the hands relative to the middle trunk point. So I can roughly, interpret this as the rotation of the arms. But anyways, the rotation of the arms show a significant correlation to cleavage speed. And then we can look at also the so-called kinematic sequences. And we can find the 3 sequences in golf swing. The first sequence is a backswing sequence. Basically, the kinematic sequences in golf swing are established based on the angular velocity patterns. So we have angular velocity of the hip line, shoulder line, upper lever, club, and this is the wrist angular velocity. But the backswing sequence is based on the timings of the peak angular velocities during the backswing. So these points here. And then the transition sequence is based on the timings of the transitions. So this is a pelvis transition, and then the shoulders, arms, and then this is the club. And these timings correspond to these peak angular positions. So this is a hip line angular position. This is a shoulder line. This is the upper lever, and then this is the club. And then the downswing sequences again based on the timings of the peak angular velocities during the downswing. So pelvis here, shoulder line, the upper lever, and then club here. And then also this sky blue line here, this shows the wrist motion. So here is the maximum cocking. And then this is the beginning of the uncocking, wrist uncocking. So this event is called the maximum cocking here. But the timing, and then also wrist uncocking plus peak wrist uncocking velocity here, these are important. So then let's take a look at one by one here. First, the peak angular velocities. So we'll first look at the backswing peak angular velocities. And among these 3 here, this is the hip line peak angular velocity. This is the shoulder line and the upper lever. These 3 show significant correlations to cleavage speed. So in other words, the faster you rotate your axle and the upper lever, then you tend to have a higher cleavage speed during the backswing here. And then during the downswing, all these peak angular velocities show significant correlation to cleavage speed. So in other words, in the downswing, it's important to develop large angular velocities, regardless of the body part. So including the uncocking peak here. So all of them show significant correlation to cleavage speed. And then from the peak value to the impact, we will see a decrease in the angular velocity. And particularly the pelvis angular velocity and the upper level angular velocity, these decreases show a significant correlation to cleavage speed. So the more angular velocity you lose, the higher the cleavage velocity is, cleavage speed is. So it is important. What it means is it is important to reach a large peak value, and then by having enough time, and you have to lose the body angular velocity. Okay? So these show the deceleration, how much angular velocity loss we have. And then at impact, obviously the club peak angular velocity here, and then the upper level and the shoulder line angular velocity at impact. These all show significant correlations to cleaver speed, including the peak uncocking angular velocity, the peak wrist angular velocity during the downswing. So what we basically see is the so-called summation of speed principle here. So as you go from more central body part to a peripheral body part, the angular velocity is actually increased. And then both in the backswing and the downswing, so it's called the summation of speed. But at the same time, most of the cases, the peak angular velocities in the backswing and downswing are significantly correlated to cleaver speed. And then let's take a look at the sequence. So the timings. First, this shows the backswing sequence. In the backswing, the shoulder line, the hip line, in other words, the axle, reaches the peak angular velocity at a similar point, similar time point. So we cannot really separate these. And then the upper level shows a peak angular velocity way later than this. And then this is the club peak angular velocity. So we have a separation here and here. So in general, we see a partial central to a peripheral sequence. And among these, the timing of the shoulder line peak angular velocity shows a significant correlation to cleaver speed. And then the more delayed onset of the shoulder peak angular velocity corresponds to a higher cleaver speed. So this arrow means that. And then during the downswing, we have somewhat different results. Again, in general, if we look at the statistical results, then the hip line, shoulder line together here, and then we have separation between the axle and the upper lever, and then the upper lever and the lower lever. And then this time gap is large, wide here. But although statistically this shows us significant differences, but actually the difference is only about 10 milliseconds. So that means 1/100th of a second. So it's not much. So essentially these peaks are happening almost at the same time. And you don't expect really a sequential onset of these peaks because you don't have that much time in the downswing. And the one thing quite interesting here is that these timings do not show significant correlation to cleaver speed. None of these here. But if someone swings fast in the downswing, then generally these peaks have to appear later. Okay? So then we also should show this kind of a tendency. The more delayed onsets of these should be associated with the higher cleaver speed. But however, during the downswing, you have to increase the angular velocity quickly. So reach the sufficient peak angular velocity early on. You should have enough time from the peak to impact in order to accelerate the club. So we have two conflicting aspects here. One, if the swing is faster, then these peaks should show up later. That's one. But for the necessity, we have to accelerate the body early on and then reach the peak angular velocity early so that we can have enough time between the peak and the impact. So that will bring the peaks more earlier. So because these two conflicting aspects, we don't have any significant correlations between the timings of these peaks and the cleaver speed. Now, during the transition, we see clear central to peripheral sequence. So the pelvis here, and then shoulder line, and upper lever, and the club. If we add the thorax angular velocity here, then we'll have a complete picture. But basically, during the transition, we see a complete central to peripheral sequence. And also, these three here the pelvis, and then the upper arm, upper lever, and then the lower lever. These timings also show significant correlations to equilibrium speed. So the more delayed onsets of these will be associated with the higher equilibrium speed. So we see this trend here in this trend, but not in the downstream. Okay? So this is something you have to understand. Again, we have to accelerate the body angularly as early as possible, and they have enough time between the peak and the impact to further accelerate the club. So we see these results in terms of the sequence. And then let's move on to the golfer-ground interaction. So first, the forces. And here I will mainly look at the peak forces. First, the forward backward ground reaction forces. So the green line shows the forward backward force acting on the lead foot. Blue is the trail foot, and then red is the total. So as you can see here, during the backswing, we see this forward and backward force components here. So on the lead foot, we have forward force acting, and on the trail foot, we have backward force acting. And interestingly, if you look at these two, they are almost symmetric throughout the swing. Particularly, it's true here. But in the downswing, still we see this symmetric trend, but the backward force acting on the lead foot is larger than the forward force acting on the trail foot. So the net is backward. Okay? And so during the downswing, we see larger forward backward components. And among the picks in the downswing, the maximum backward force acting on the lead foot, and the maximum forward force acting on the trail foot, and then the maximum backward force in the total forward backward ground reaction force. These three picks show significant correlation to equilibrium speed. So in the downswing, it is important to push the ground forward and backward. That's what we see here. And then for the lateral direction, so toward and away ground reaction forces. So here we see the maximum force acting in the toward direction. So the forces are inclined quite a bit. Okay? So this gives this force here toward the target. And then the blue shows the toward force acting on the trail foot here. And then the red one is the total. And then in the downswing, particularly at this instant here, you will see large away force acting on the lead foot here. So by pushing the ground down and outward, the golfer generates this inward force, or which is away from the target. This pick alone shows a significant correlation to equilibrium speed. All other picks, show no correlation to equilibrium speed. Part of the reason is that for the trail foot force here, it's hard to establish a clear peak because the forces are maintained here. Okay, and then this total toward force, this did not show a significant correlation to equilibrium speed. So in this one, the only peak force that showed significant correlation to equilibrium speed was the lead foot force, which is acting in the away direction. And then in the vertical direction, we have also some significant correlations observed. So if you look at first the total vertical force, here we have a little bit of active push here, and then we have long unweighting phase here. And then again, good active push here. So this value is the unweighting peak. And then, the more unweighting you have, the higher the equilibrium speed is. We have significant correlation between this peak and the equilibrium speed. So the more unweighting you have, the higher the equilibrium speed is. And also this peak here during the downswing. The larger the vertical force is, the higher the cleavage speed is. And then also at the similar point here, the force acting on the lead foot, this also shows a significant correlation to cleavage speed. So this total force, total vertical force is basically mainly coming from the lead foot here. The force acting on the trail foot is not much. So that's why the lead foot push is important. But more importantly, this unweighting peak is important. So if we have a good unweighting, then you can have a good push here. So these all show significant correlation to cleavage speed. And then let's move on to the torques we generate through interaction with the ground. So first, the so-called GRF torque. The moments means a torque. So basically, I use a moment and torque interchangeably. But this is the torque produced by the total ground reaction force. So in the frontal plane here, this is the total ground reaction force acting at this instant. And then it's passing this way. And then this separation here, this is the center of mass of the system. And then this is the total ground reaction force. And this separation is called moment arm. Okay, moment arm or lever arm. And then the torque generated is basically this force magnitude times this moment arm here. So in order to generate the large torque, then either you generate large force or you have maintained long moment arm. But generally, the force magnitude does not vary from one golfer to another. So you don't have a lot of control over this magnitude. But however, the moment arm can be very different among the golfers. So the length of the moment arm makes big difference. So we can look at the GRF torque in the frontal plane, also in the lateral plane. In the lateral plane near the impact, you will see that the maximum torque is generated. So here's a force magnitude, and you have the moment arm here. So when you multiply this force and this moment arm, then you will get the torque. So in this case, actually, we have supporting torque acting. And in the horizontal plane, we also have the GRF torque. So this is the combined ground reaction force acting at the center pressure. This is center of mass. So this is the force magnitude, and this is the moment arm. So when you multiply these, then you'll be at the GRF torque generated on the horizontal plane. But among these, this is the main one. And that this also shows a lot of variations among golfers. So by looking at the frontal plane GRF torque, you can really characterize the swing of a given golfer. But anyways, so among these, particularly we'll look at this one here, frontal plane GRF torque. So here's the pattern. So the red line shows the total GRF torque in the frontal plane. And then the green one is the GRF torque coming from the lead foot. And then the blue is coming from the trail foot. Then obviously, in the downswing, this peak torque is mainly coming from the lead foot. The trail foot actually shows a torque in the opposite direction. So you will cancel out the portion of the torque generated by the lead foot. But these two peaks show a significant correlation to cleavage speed. So in other words, if you generate more torque on the frontal plane by using the ground reaction force, then you tend to have higher cleavage speed. So you have this peak during the backswing, and then this peak is coming from this one here during the downswing. And then these forces are passing the right side of the center of mass. So overall, the torque will be counterclockwise in this image here. The next is the longest moment arm observed in the frontal plane. So as we saw earlier, the GRF torque is basically the force of magnitude times moment arm. Yeah, so the moment arm plays an important role. So if we look at the moment arm in the frontal plane, the pattern looks like this. So when the force is passing the left side of the center of mass, then we have this negative moment arm here. When the force is passing the right side, then we have positive moment arm. And the peak occurs between top of backswing and EDA, early downswing arm-based. But this peak, the longest moment arm, shows a significant correlation to cleavage speed. So in other words, it is important to maintain a long moment arm during the downswing to generate large gyrative torque produced by this ground reaction force about the center of mass. And then earlier we talked about the gyrative torque in all three planes. And then we have additional torques on the horizontal plane about the vertical axis. And there are two more sources of torques that produce rotation on the horizontal plane or rotation about the vertical axis. Those are the so-called pivoting torque and the foot contact torque. So the foot contact torque is coming from direct interaction of the foot with the ground. By using your foot, using the torsional interaction with the ground, you can generate these torques. And also, by pushing the ground in different directions using the both feet, you can also generate the torque on the horizontal plane about the vertical axis. It's called the pivoting torque. So in this particular case, this force acting on the left foot or leader foot, and the force acting on the trail foot, both have moment arms about the combined center pressure here. So this is the moment arm of this force, and then this is the moment arm of this force, because the moment arm is always the separation between the center of rotation and the force. So these moment arms will basically provide torques about this point here. But if we look at this more carefully, this pivoting torque is mainly coming from the forward-backward force here. So the backward force acting on the lead foot during the downswing, and the forward force acting on the trail foot. These provide most of the pivoting torque. And particularly if you look at the force acting on the trail foot, we have a forward force acting on the trail foot in the downswing. And then this has a long moment time because by this time, the center pressure is already shifted toward the leader foot. But because of that, the trail foot force will have a long moment time. So this gives a good amount of pivoting torque coming from the trail foot. But anyways, so on the horizontal plane, we have three sources of torques. The gyrative torque we looked at earlier, the pivoting torque, and then foot contact torques. Among these, the pivoting torque is the largest. Almost all horizontal plane torque, or the torque about the vertical axis, coming from this pivoting mechanism by pushing the grounds in different directions using both feet. So let's take a look at these two torques. The green line here is the pivoting torque, and then the blue line is the foot contact torque. And then the red line is the sum of those two. So during the backswing, early on is mostly it's a pivoting torque, and then but from here to here, you see the role of the foot contact torque because the pivoting torque is close to zero. But then in the downswing again, the pivoting torque becomes the main one, and the foot contact torque is relatively small compared to the pivoting torque. So here during the downswing, the sum, the peak value from the sum of these two, and then the pivoting torque peak, these are showing significant correlation to cleavage speed. And another interesting aspect here is that if we break down the pivoting torque to both feet here, so this green one is the pivoting torque coming from the lead foot, and then this blue one is the pivoting torque coming from the trail foot. Although a larger force is acting on the lead foot, but the pivoting torque coming from the trail foot is greater. It's because, as I mentioned earlier, so the pivoting torque is mainly caused by the forward-backward forces here. And then at this point, although the force is smaller than the lead foot force, but it has a lot longer momentum because the center pressure is shifted toward the lead foot. So as a result, the trail foot shows a larger torque, and actually this peak shows a significant correlation to cleavage speed, and that this peak does not. So what we learned from this is that generally in terms of the torque generation, the main role of the lead foot is generating the gyrative torque in the frontal plane, and then the main role of the trail foot is generating a large pivoting torque on the horizontal plane. And then finally, here we have the center pressure shift. So center pressure shifts between the trail foot and the lead foot here. So if it completely moves to a trail foot, then it's 0% here. And then when it is completely moved to the lead foot, then it will be 100%. So it will be between 0 and 100% of the stance. And at this point is when the center pressure is located the closest to the trail foot. And at this point for the red line, which is the driver, this one here is when the center pressure is located the closest to the lead foot. So essentially in the driving condition, so on the average, the center pressure moves between this and this. So it's about 25% to 75% on the average. Now, in this one, interestingly, this peak and this peak, these two peaks do not show a significant correlation to cleavage speed. Rather, the center pressure position at EDA, early downswing arm-based. So when the lead arm is parallel to the ground on the way down, the center pressure position at this event shows significant correlation to cleavage speed. So it is really important to move the center pressure toward the lead foot as much as possible at the EDA, okay? Because the larger the better. So the more closer to the lead foot, the better. So among different the center pressure positions at different events, and then the peak values here, only the center pressure position at EDA show the consistent correlation to cleavage speed. Now let's go back to this diagram that I presented at the beginning. So what I have done so far is, using different parameters in these areas, I try to develop so-called correlation profiles. So which factors are significantly correlate to cleavage speed, and then we could identify several factors. Then the next task is to put all these together and then develop a big picture. So, and this is what I end up getting. So to me, the most important aspect in golf swing is first the golf-ground interaction. So how the golfer interacts with the ground in terms of first the forces. So the both feet interacting with the ground, pushing the ground, then ground will generate this reaction force and then exert the forces to the feet. And then in terms of the role of the lead leg, the peak forces in all three directions during the downswing, they show the single correlation to cleavage speed. But the trail leg, only the forward peak during the downswing show the single correlation to cleavage speed, which is obviously associated with the pivoting torque. And also overall, the unweighting and the active push, these are quite important in terms of the vertical interaction with the ground. So when you have a good unweighting toward the end of the backswing and then the early part of downswing, then this will give you a good push after that. So the unweighting and push, this is also a key aspect in terms of interaction with the ground. And then these forces will affect the center pressure position, particularly in the frontal plane, the lateral shift in the center pressure. Because the center pressure position basically reflects the relative proportion of the vertical forces acting on both feet. So depending on how you push the ground, the center of pressure will shift. But also depending on the direction of the force and then the center of pressure position, the moment arms will change quite a bit. So basically the forces will affect the center of pressure position and also moment arms. And then also using the forces, we generate torques in this one. The main role of the lead leg is to generate large gyrative torque in the frontal plane. And then the main role of the trail leg is to generate large pivoting torque on the horizontal plane about the vertical axis. So we have different roles of the two legs. But anyways, so through the interaction with the ground, we control these. And then the forces are directly associated with the linear motion of the body. And particularly what we saw in the correlation profile was that the vertical motion of the body and the pelvis are significantly correlated to clever speed. So that reflects the importance of the vertical interaction with the ground. And although the lean direction angle, okay, this was calculated as part of the angular motion of the thorax, but leaning away or toward the target, this has some implication in terms of the linear motion of the thorax. So I put it here. So during the backswing, as we turn, the body leans up toward the target slightly, and then toward the end of the downswing, the body leans away from the target quite a bit. So these are directly associated with the forces. And then all the on-plane angular motion parameters, such as the rotation ranges of the axial chain system and maximum angular positions and angular velocities, peak angular velocities, and also acceleration, deceleration of the angular motion. All these are directly associated with the torques generated, because torque is the cause of rotation and acceleration. So we can connect all these together this way. And then, so in addition to this, we have the so-called orchestration of the motion. So on one hand, we have large forces generated, or large torques generated. But in terms of the overall, organization of the motion, orchestration is really important. So orchestration includes the sequences and also coordinations among the joint motions, and also the wrist uncocking aspect. So in order to generate the high clever speed, you should have a delayed release. And then with that, you have to generate the large wrist uncocking velocity at impact. So these are also related to acceleration and the deceleration of the axial chain system. But then these are also all related to the linear motion and the angular motion. And the way I interpret this is that the connection between the linear motion characteristics and this orchestration aspect, then the key idea is in terms of rhythm, swing rhythm, lower body shift. So shift means both the horizontal direction and the vertical direction. So here, the vertical motions all show a significant correlation to clever speed. So the vertical motion is really important. But at the same time, good vertical rhythm will also give good horizontal rhythm. So overall, we have the lower body shift here. And then these are all rotational motions. And so we have this upper body turn here. So by considering all these, we'll be able to find the last missing part here, which is how to promote this good upswing here. So if we can come up with something that promotes all these at once, then it will be quite nice, because all these factors are associated with the high clever speed. And if we can find a way to promote all these aspects at once in the holistic approach, then that will be quite useful. in terms of increasing the clever speed. And my conclusion here is the so-called K grandiose two-step swing drills. Because in the two-step swing drills, you have to work with the ground. By taking the steps, you have both the horizontal interaction and the vertical interaction naturally. And you'll be able to push the ground. And then using that, you'll be able to generate a good amount of torque. So these two-step swing drills have 3 stages. First, stage 1, you take both steps here. So initially, you throw the club toward the target. This is called the trigger motion, club trigger motion. Using the trigger motion using the club, and then take this away step. And during the backswing, you will take the toward step and then swing. So this will give you a good flow. And then stage 2. So once you develop good overall rhythm here, then you will be able to eliminate the first step and only use the second step here. Still maintain a similar rhythm here. In the stage 3, now you eliminate both steps. So the whole idea here is that develop good rhythm with the steps in stage 1, and then just utilize the rhythm while eliminating the steps. So in this one, this is similar to the normal swing in the sense that you don't take any steps, but still in stage 3, you are using the trigger motion. And between all these, what you can use is the so-called stage X. So in this one, you don't have a set number of swings back and forth, but you can repeat as many and then later let it go. This will also keep you good flow of motion. And then finally, stage 4 is the actual normal swing. In this one, as you can see, no trigger motion with the club, but he's using slight body trigger here. But still try to maintain the rhythm. So this is the normal swing with or without trigger motion. So in these, there are some important aspects here, such as the active backswing. We saw in the kinematic sequence that the peak angular velocity during the backswing showed the significant correlation to clever speed. That means that if you turn your body faster, then you tend to have higher clever speed. But more importantly, when you have a faster backswing, you can use the backswing as a counter movement, and you can generate good initial condition for the downswing. So this is not the main topic in this presentation, but so when you use the backswing actively, then you will have really good initial conditions for the downswing. So some of the significant correlations we saw in the downswing, they can be promoted through faster backswing. So active backswing is really important. And then the timing of the second step, particularly in the stage 1 here. If the timing of the second step is late, that means you have issues in terms of the weight shift. So the weight shift is not done properly in time, then you will always have trouble in the second step. So the fact that you have the right timing of the second step, that means you have to put the weight shift or central pressure shift. And then it should be a lower body driven swing. So always start the swing with the lower body, and then add the shoulder turn and then arms and so on. Because we saw in the backswing and also downswing, we saw the axle reaches the peak angular velocity first, and then the upper lever and the club. And then similar trend in downswing, although we had a really narrow time window for the axle segments and then the upper lever. But in general, the idea is you will initiate the rotation with the body first, and then add the arm motion and eventually the wrist motion. So it should be a lower body driven swing. And then throughout these stages, you have to use a similar rhythm. Okay? And then using taking advantage of that rhythm in your normal swing, you will be able to come up with a really strong or robust, biomechanically robust golf swing, which will eventually give you good speed and so on. So, in my perspective, when you have a good overall swing pattern, then speed automatically comes with it. So that's why, again, I use these step drills quite a bit, and then the theoretical foundation of these two-step swing drills is what I presented today, or the correlation profiles, and then the big picture. So understanding the biomechanical foundation of these, and then using these step drills properly, you will be able to see a lot of good results. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation today, and through this virtual presentation, you all are now qualified. So try to utilize this information in your daily teaching. Thank you very much.
That was a great presentation. So, are you there, Mike?
I'm here. I am here now. I thought it was incredible.
Yeah, that's a lot of the things that we do and that we've seen in people that they're gaining speed. Why don't you talk a little bit about how your history in measuring ground reaction forces came about, and how you've been seeing some of these patterns over the last 30 years?
It starts out, there was a orthopedic surgeon out of Vail, Colorado, who was probably the best in the world, and he, Dick Stedman, and we became friends, and he had a biomechanist who worked for him, who was also the head biomechanist for the U.S. Olympic team. His name was Chuck Dillman, and Chuck and I began measuring ground reaction forces. I then bought a set of force plates, Kistler at the time, which was a lot of money, cost me a house, and it was we began measuring and trying to figure out, because we didn't have a clue what we were looking for. We were looking for weight shift. Instead, we found different things, and just how the body worked. And there was no one pattern. There were several patterns, and so that was the birth of the laws of the golf swing. And the laws, because it didn't answer all the questions, became what we're doing now and answering more questions. E.A. Tischler was a big help early in my stuff that we were doing here with you and I, and terrific teacher. And you and I and have just continued to make this better and better. And through the help of Dr. Kwon, Scott Len, Mike Duffey, and Phil Cheatham, and Sasha McKenzie, we've been able to verify what we found, and it's just made us better. Don't you think?
100% agree.
I went out on tour, men's tour and ladies tour, with Mike McTeague, and he had a thing called Sports Sense, and we put these on different people and we measured them. Then I was also out there with a guy by the name of Dr. Jim Sedmeyer, and we filmed people at high speed and did 3D motion capture, which took forever. It was hand digitized, and started to learn things. So, that stuff always existed. It's just become so much more portable, affordable, and usable.
Becoming more practical, thanks to you, Mike.
Well, Sportsbox is a huge leap in the proper direction. What it does is it allows us to do things that used to take weeks to do, and thousands of dollars. And it's amazing what it can do. I mean, there's so many things that I didn't see, even with the force plates or with the quad or the TrackMan. Sportsbox brought to my attention, and it's made me that much better teacher.
It's going to be exciting what that brings to the teaching world over the next few years here. Well, we've got the man, the myth, the legend, David Edel.
Let me introduce him. David Edel is the smartest man in golf. I mean, he is brilliant, phenomenal teacher. He is a great person. The one thing about David that's amazing is he can make anything, including watches, fishing. Have you started making money yet?
No, Mike, I haven't figured that one out yet.
But you can make anything but money.
I know.
Every time
I haven't learned your trick.
the groover was a thing I drew on a napkin, and David way over engineered it and made the greatest teaching tool of all time. The grip analyzer, I drew it on a napkin, and once again, he way over engineered it and made it one of the great analyzation tools of all time. If you teach golf, you should have a groover and a grip analyzer. And what he's doing with wedges, I went to him with an idea with wedges, and he blew right past my idea, and he's come up with an incredible way to build wedges that fit every individual. David, take it away.
Well, thank you, Mike. To everybody, I just want to thank Mike Adams. He's been one of the greatest influences in my life. Been a phenomenal mentor to me. I can't express to everybody how important this guy is to me, and I think to everybody that gets involved with him, the knowledge that he passes on. He's just a phenomenal human being, and in my opinion, the best teacher in the world. Mechanically understands the golf swing better than anybody out there. And I've taken these principles and I've applied them not only to the way I teach and the way I present things, but also in the way I manufacture and make golf equipment. And today I want to talk to you not as a you know, I'm a brand. Edel Golf is a golf club company, and I don't want anybody that's watching this to misconstrue that I'm trying to peddle my golf clubs. My golf clubs are built around ideas and methods that make us better teachers and better fitters. And so that's the sole purpose of my presentation, though I will, unfortunately, I have created things that I think once you hear my presentation, you might want to really take a look at. I build toolboxes for you guys. I want this process to be vertically integrated from education to how we instruct to the product itself that you're able to use. And the problem is if you don't have the correct tool, then you're forced to manipulate other variables and teach around those variables too. So I think what I'm going to present today, they'll brief. I'm always available for people to talk to me. You can get a hold of me either through Edel Golf. And I'd be more than happy to talk to you in a greater depth if you have a greater interest in it. So what I want to talk to you about today is the steering force. This is a phrase that I've kind of coined, stumbled on it, and it's essentially what goes on mechanically in a golf club, regardless of who's using it. It's been around forever. But we have to have an understanding of it to do a great job as teachers and as fitters, because it's a very prevalent force. And once you understand some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, I think you're going to have a stronger understanding of maybe the things that are hindering you as a teacher with your student because the equipment that they have. And, you know, it's the only thing that interfaces between the golf ball and us. And, you know, bioswing dynamics gives us this platform to screen people, measure people, take that knowledge, and then apply correctly that information that is pertinent in the golf club for the execution of what you're trying to do. So a lot of times you watch presentations and you get a lot of information, but it's very hard to apply. So I want you to walk away with a skill set today, and hopefully you will. So what is club fitting? I mean, can be kind of a very mundane, boring topic because there's so much information out there. Every company's got their own spin on things. I want to talk to you about what's really going on in a golf club. So club fitting is the art of using a defined process to find the ideal golf club for a given player's needs, right? We're all different. We will all have different needs in the golf club. And we can all look back and say, oh, I got a golf club. Man, I used to play these clubs amazing, and then I switched to a different model, and then somehow the cheese slid off the cracker, and I don't know what actually happened. So the influencing factors are the mechanics of force and leverage. Every golf club has, you know, an right angle force to the shaft because we have a club head on it. You know, speed stick, everything's in line. But when you put a face on a golf club, you create leverage. And whether it's a putter, an iron, wedge, or a driver. So what I'm talking about isn't just about irons or wedges, it's about golf clubs in general. And then we have the perception of the players. So players have perceptions of what they think they need to do. They have perceptions of how the golf club looks, what they think they need. And then there's the feel that is created from the golf club. And golf clubs produce varying degrees of feel and changes in feel. And we know that immediately. Tiger Woods can sense 2 gram change in the golf club or 1 gram difference in a driver, right? You wouldn't think that that's a lot of weight, but it is due to Newton's force law, you know, Newton pounds of force. You're going to have different values based on club head speed, length of the lever, and then the player's biomechanics. So hopefully everybody will walk away and say there's this steering force, and it becomes a word that'll be used in the golf industry as a phrase, because I couldn't think of anything else. But if you think of a steering wheel, you're applying leverage is creating this rotational force on a golf club. So if you think of a golf shaft and then you think of here's a wheel on it, right? There's force that's going to be applying this direction and that direction. There's forces. It's always going to have somewhat of a layback force, but there's golf designs in the head and things that I'm going to talk about that will create different forces, right, in the golf club that create different slots and different angles of attack, and can either help or hinder what you're trying to accomplish. So we created a golf club here. You'll see that has 3 weight forks in it. And so the genesis of this, so when I first met Mike, most golf clubs had CG and wedges that were very close to the heel, and by design, and just due to traditional design of golf clubs. So we tried to develop, and we did, a golf club with shorter hosel, move CG farther out, and in that process, now what I know now about what the steering force does, I made a golf club that didn't work for a lot of people. And it didn't work because of the forces that are being applied on a golf club not matching the golfer. I'd have people say, Dave, why does your wedge, everything's the same, why does your wedge fly 9 yards shorter than my bulky or what have you? And I couldn't explain that. I didn't know why. I thought, well, it must be you, or because the golf club's a golf club. It should be good. The CG's in the middle of the golf club. So what we're talking about isn't necessarily CG. CG moves fractionally by moving weight because of the overall mass of the head, but it has a very strong, there's a very strong force due to the leverage where that weight is placed. And it makes a huge difference to face closure rate and layback forces. So the steering force has always been there. It's been there since long nose clubs all the way to now. So now I'm going to present to you a way to look at why and what are the mechanical attributes to the fitting systems that you have or the golf clubs that you currently play. And we can see trends in golf professionals that use a certain type of golf club, an iron, versus another type of an iron. And it's not because, you know, why did Colin Montgomery play Big Bertha iron? We'll explain that. When you think that, oh, that's not a golf club built for a tour player. But he performed and won 8 merit orders using that. So the steering force is the leverage created by the right angles created by the nature of the golf club's design, right? So the steering force is a transitional force. So as that club is going back, so as we take it back, that golf club transitions, and that's when the table's set. The minute the club starts going back, there's fields that are generated, and then there's leverage forces that are creating different types of slots and different types of rotational values. So if we look historically at golf clubs, you can see there on the left, we have an R90, very long hosel, right? So a lot of mass was in the hosel area, compact head, fairly deep in the heel. So that essentially moves mass towards the hosel of the golf club. So we're talking about where the proximity of the majority of the mass is being distributed. It's not the CG so much, it's the amount of mass that goes out to the toe or towards the heel. And it may not seem significant, but when you look at an I2 sandwich here, for example, Carson created offset, and which, you know, offset's always kind of been there, but he had a lot of offset, and we'll talk about that, low heel and a high toe, right? And so I could never play I2s, even though I played them. After I got away from them, things improved for me. But I played them because everybody was playing them, and I thought they were awesome. But then, you know, things evolved into like the 588 Cleveland. That became a benchmark for wedges. Very high heel. Knuckles, I call these knuckles, these upper, on the ends of the golf club, very, very pronounced. And then we created our wedge over there at the bottom left of the screen, and that we took out a lot of weight in the heel, a lot of weight in the toe, and created these contours, which subsequently got, you know, I think a lot of people looked at what we were doing with center gravity, shortening the hosel, moving the CG out, and that narrative started showing up in Volkeys, and you can see the design of the Volkey with that large amount of mass up in the high toe. And so you can see a lot of, I think, once you understand what I'm going to talk about here in a second, that's why a lot of the people started struggling with the Volkeys, because the weight distribution changed from year to year. It's been changing, and now they're realizing that they've got to go back and lengthen hosels and change shapes, because there's a segment of their golfing population that we're starting to struggle with, because there was a lot of mass up in the high toe, and that creates a rotational force. And so we see here, the high toe Callaway here, that is basically was established for basically Phil Mickelson, who's a side under golfer, and side under golfers are going to like that kind of weight distribution, but a cover golfer will not. So that's why we'll see different types of golf clubs producing different values to different types of players. And that's how it correlates into the bioswing dynamics so well. So the effects of the steering force, it influences path. I'm seeing path change in many cases upwards of 3.5 to 4 degrees simply by changing the weight in the golf club. By moving 8 grams of weight, toe, heel, or center, I'm changing path significantly on people. And it's crazy. And I'll have more data later on. We're doing a lot of studies. Mike Duffey's done a study for me. I'm going to show some data from that. It changes face closure rates, because if you have weight in the toe, that's going to create a layback force. And if you have weight in the center of the golf club, it'll be more neutral. And then if you have weight towards the heel, you're going to see a greater closing force. So we're seeing greater face closure rates because if the face is able to close faster, then the player can swing more into out. If the face is laying back, you're going to start seeing path changes to try to fix that layback force, depending on a person's biomechanics, which changes slotting, it changes the angle of attack, right? So if someone's laying back, they could have a shallowing force that's changing their angle of attack. If they're able to cover it and go after it, then they can hit down on it more and rotate faster. And obviously will change low point by having these factors. So factors that influence the steering force, distribution of mass in the club head. So, you know, traditionally we've seen, you know, like here's a Hogan Apex. Hogan created an underslung hosel here, that very high heel, compact blade. So most of the mass is, in general, is located closer to the hosel of the golf club, where you got a I2 iron, right, where a predominance of mass and offset is producing a layback force that's coming from the distribution of mass and the length of the golf club. So whether it's a driver or an iron or a wedge, it all matters. Blade length has a lot to do with it. Center of gravity, you know, the older golf clubs back in the day had the center of gravity much closer to the heel. Now we've been in this game improvement kind of a scenario. We've started extending blade lengths and mass distribution farther out on the toe of the golf club. Head shape, height of the heel, height of the toe. And obviously, club length has an effect on steering force due to the leverage created by longer or shorter golf club. So heel height's a big one. You can see here how low an I2 is versus a blade more compacted is. So those are very, very strong. Players that are cover golfers are going to do better with a more compact blade, higher heel, less offset. Players that generally gravitate towards like an I2 or some of the longer bladed clubs, more gaming or performance cavity back, they're going to be a longer blade and lower heels, a little higher toes. Those are, you're looking at a change in mass. It could be 10 grams to 14 grams of difference from the center line of the shaft. That's a lot of mass moving at speed. So you can see here's a comparison of a company's line of clubs. You can see there's a progressive trend from offset and lengths. That those are going to have value. They're going to have a certain value. A cover golfer is going to do very well with that. An side on golfer or side cover are going to do well maybe in the middle, and an under golfer, side under golfer are going to do well with the longer blade, creating more leverage, creating that layback force, right? So we're dealing with rotational transition forces in the backswing to the downswing that creates rotational forces in the golf club. Offset is a huge one too. One, offset changes aim bias. I've done some studies on aim bias with offset. You would think that an offset golf club aims more left because that's what we've been told. But actually, people aim more to the right with offset than an onset golf club. I've done studies on it where in a laser close to the wall with the face of a golf club, I'm moving it that much through extreme offset to no offset. Which you do the pizza pie thing, it gets really wide out there. The aim bias difference. Now we have a center of mass, center of gravity difference so we got the center line of the shaft on both of these. You can see a high toe wedge has a predominance of mass out here up in the high toe, moving the CG farther up, which is going to create a rotational force that's going to, in transition, which is going to lay the golf club off more. All right. So I see a lot of people show up and they're cover golfers. I do all screen everybody when I fit them, and they like, I never really liked this wedge. It's really good out of the bunker, and that's about it because they need a layback force to hit better bunker shots. But in general, they go, they can't hit this thing anywhere. It doesn't work. It feels funky. They need a golf club with less offset, CG closer to or center of mass, move closer to the axis of the shaft, which helps them cover it more. So we created a wedge that we can move a weight that weighs upwards of 8 to 10. We can vary the middle or the heaviest weight, and we can rotate weights to different locations on the golf club. And so you can see here, Mike had always talked about, way to drop trajectory down and keep spin up by porting wedges. And so I thought, I needed to create a new line of wedges. So I wanted to change this vertical CG. Wanted to create a vertical CG scenario. So I ported 3 deep holes, took a lot of mass out of the bottom of the golf club, and I stuck lead tape all over the back, high up, just to test, right? It was just a real crude rough test. And what happened was I almost shanked it, and I hit it high right, and I lost about 10 yards of distance. And I could finally, as a player, kind of figure out how to square it up. But then I took the lead tape off and I rolled it into a ball and stuck it into the toe. Then I moved it to the center and I moved it to the heel, and I got totally different scenarios. My son Nico, I put it in the toe, and he started hitting shanks because the golf club started transitioning. The handle started moving outward and upward, and the head rotating backward with layback, and it got him out of his slot. And then when he tried to recorrect to get the golf club back on plane, the shaft presented, and the hosel presented instead of the face, and it was crazy. So then I took a bulky because I needed something flat on the back, so I just took a bulky and ported 3 weight ports, and it took one of my weights out of my single length set and started moving the weight around and started testing people, screening them, and I started making correlations between cover golfers side-ons and unders. And it blew me away how much path changed, distance changed, and it's beyond relative. So we went to then and we designed a new wedge, different grinds, all whole kit and caboodle, but the steering force that comes from being able to move mass, toe center, or heel is incredible. And what we found out was 75% of the participants showed a 25. This is data that Mike Duffey. This is all Mike's. He crunched our numbers from our study. Showed a 25% reduction in the mean error perpendicular to the target line, left, right. 24% needed the heavy weight in the middle of the golf club, which blew me away. I didn't think it would be that high a number, low a number. That means that 76% of the golfers need either the weight in the toe or the heel for optimum performance. And we've got a 10% improvement in spin with the heavy weight in the correct location, whether it was toe center or heel. There was a 44% improvement in downrange ballistics, peak height, lateral dispersion, and distance with the weight in the correct location. That's huge. You can imagine 44% improvement just by moving 8 grams of mass. It's actually 6 grams of mass because you got a 2 gram dummy weight, 2 dummy weights, and you got an 8 gram weight. That was, I mean, that's phenomenal. I mean, just by changing this, the weight, the heavy weight, we got such incredible result. 6 grams matters a lot. And I never understood when I saw tour players' irons where they had lead tape all over different places of the golf club. I thought that can't make a difference. You know, I thought it was more for swing weighting or whatever. They were trying to create fields. They were trying to create transitional forces. You saw them with lead tape in the heel, and some players had it in the toe. You know, Lee Trevino, from what I understand, you know, he played blades because that's about all they had back then. But he would have specially made irons that they would, you know, cut a hole, bore a hole into the iron, put some tungsten in there with some solder, and then rechrome over it. And he had weight out towards the toe of his golf club because he needed a layback force being an end of the golfer. So huge change. So I just said that 44% improvement, crazy. And you can see from the worst club to the best club how much things change. I mean, that's a lot. The result was a 4.3 yards closer with the weight in the correct ball. I mean, that's massive. No, it was 1.8 yards away from the hole with it. The worst was 4.0. So that's a huge difference. Proximity. I mean, that's what a golfer cares about, right? How high I hit it, controlling trajectory, being consistent with that, being consistent with distance and lateral dispersion. That's what fitting's about. That's our job, is to make those values improve. So those are some of the numbers there. Terry, the second best club, you can see there was a 23% improvement from the second best club. Lateral, it was 17% closer. Those are big numbers just by changing weight. Same golf club. So in that wedge that I showed you, 3 weight boards, there's 3 golf clubs in that golf club, in that golf club. So as a teacher, you have the ability to change mass as you change the student. And you can change the student by changing the mass. So if the grip is strong and values of their biomechanics will be very pertinent to where the weight is and then how you can get them to where they want. Why do people have such a strong grip? As teachers, you go, this guy's got the strongest grip. I can't get him out of it. Well, if he's got a ton of layback force on his golf club, he needs a stronger grip to try to square the golf club up because he has these layback forces. So you try to put him in a more neutral grip, and you can't get him to hit it well because the golf club is influencing what's going on. It's changing the slot, path, and the ability to release the golf club effectively. So a lot of you know, what came first, chicken or the egg? Maybe it was a bad golf club that produces bad setup, bad grip, and stuff like that. So we did work with NG Chung, plays my stuff. She's a 2-time major champion. it was massive, the deviation changes. And you can see there, you can see that. Crazy how much better her descent angle improved, side spin improved, backspin improved. She got, you know, almost 2,000 RPMs more spin by having the weight in the right location. Meanwhile, her launch angle dropped almost 5 degrees. So that's pretty crazy, from her wedges to our wedge, just by changing weight, got spin up and launch angle down, which is optimum with a better descent angle. And ball speed improved by almost 3.5 miles an hour. That's just by changing the weight. Pretty crazy. So I look at everything, the laws of threes, and it makes understanding bioswing dynamics and what Mike and Terry are talking about so much easier if you apply things in the law of threes. And I apply it to golf clubs. You know, golf clubs either weight in the toe, center, or heel, right? Things like that. So the law of threes has been a guiding force with everything I do, and it allows me to make correlations because I don't fill my mind up with, oh, what about this? You're either, your stance is open, square, or closed. You're either long here to here, you're equal, or it's longer upper arm to lower arm. Law of threes, you start connecting all that stuff together, it makes things so much easier. Goldilocks always found a net, right? So law of threes. And the steering force works within the law of threes. So how do we use bioswing dynamics in club fitting? And how do they work, and what are the synergies? So screens, I screen every person that I fit, because I can once I understand the rules, I can screen somebody, know what they're going to need. I know where I can almost always predict where the weight's going to be from the screen. And bioswing dynamics, when I found this weight model scenario, the bioswing dynamics stuff in my head just went crazy, and I went, wow, this is how we match golf clubs up to golfer shaped people. So some of the screens that I do obviously are span to height. That's obviously going to dictate posture, and it's going to dictate takeaway slot, whether someone's going to be steeper or shallower based on their span to height and their takeaway. Lower arm to upper arm length differentials are going to dictate whether they're going to be steeper or shallower, right? So someone who's longer here and the upper arm to the lower arm, they're always going to have a, come down more of a hip slot, and players that are longer here are going to come down more of a shoulder slot, right? Fold patterns are huge. Cover fold patterns, side on and unders, dictate how the right arm presents, and what, and it's going to dictate the type of grip. So an under golfer is always going to have a stronger grip. So they don't want a golf club that has less leverage in the toe, because then the toe wants to release, and they've already got a stronger grip due to their delay and their fold pattern. Cover golfers, they're releasing the golf club earlier, and they want weight more towards the heel because they want a greater face closure rate, so that they can actually rotate through it, not get jammed up, not having the club fight their actual motion of their body as they're coming down. If the person's coming down more cover and the golf club's forcing them into this action, then they start chucking it, and they have serious issues, can cause shanking. External rotation is a really big one in this, because external rotation, so you can go through all the screens, but the one that really seems to have a huge role in whether someone needs more covering or shallowing is going to be based on their external rotation. So someone who has a lot of external rotation in their shoulder, that golf club is always drop into a shallower slot than maybe their screens show. Or potentially they get steeper because of the external rotation of the shoulder. So the external rotation of the shoulder is a big one. Post has a significant scenario in, whether someone's going to be steeper or shallower. Front posts tend to be, more stacked up, and they're going to be a little steeper. And we have to have, counter swivels and things to offset that as a feature to get some shallowing forces in there. Stance width is a big one too, because it's about laterals, how narrow someone's stance is. Their verticals are going to actuate faster than someone who's got a wider stance. They're going to have a longer glide. That's a shallowing force. And then you're combining the golf club within those dynamics. You got toe flare. Toe flares, give us hip speed. Someone's got fast hips to slow hips, how square the left foot is to the target line versus flaring it out. They're going to, rotate through. Under golfers are going to, release with a delay a little through their hip action, get their hips, the left leg locking up later. And obviously the grip is a huge one. So, like I said, it's going to be really hard if you have a golf club in their hands it's going to, create a layback, force, and they want to be a cover golfer, and the golf club is getting them in the wrong slot. You can't change the grip as easily if you have the wrong golf club in their hand. It's just plain and simple. So, the fitting is, the balance between steepening and shallowing forces. How do we shallow people out in motion? Is the balance between steepening and shallowing forces producing the neutrality. So everybody's a combination of steepening forces and shallowing forces. And so there's techniques that you've learned through bioswing dynamics, how to shallow somebody, which would maybe closing their stance, which lets them come in shallower, or opening their stance, which changes steepness. You don't have to maybe do as much of those things if you have the right golf club in their hand. But because as a teacher, you may not have the toolbox to be able to make these changes, and they come with a set of golf clubs, and so you teach around their golf clubs. As a teacher and a guiding light to people, you can now hopefully through this presentation start to think about, wow, I need to understand more about the steering force and apply it towards my student and say, bud, you got the wrong golf clubs. These things are terrible for you. They're great golf clubs. They're well made. I think almost golf clubs are all very well made. I think what makes them great is when you have the ability to control the variables in the golf club that allow you to do what you need to do for them as a fitter or teacher. It's critical to understand the steering force in this process. And an incorrect golf club can override the player's natural tendencies and alter one's natural procedure. So, like I said, it's the only thing between the golf ball and the player, and it has a huge impact on what we do. So, steepening forces, longer span to height. That person's going to take the club up more vertical, right? So that's a steepening force. They're coming from a higher position. Lower arm length being longer than the upper arm. So that's going to, in the transition coming down, the arm is going to seek a steeper slot. Front post, open stance line is a steepening force because in the geometry of the circle, it's generally going to create a steepening force, and the lack of external rotation. Shallowing force is shorter span to height, like somebody like Matt Kuchar's posture's flatter, so the club comes in shallower, right? Longer to upper, neutral to longer upper arms, like Sergio Garcia's. Seti, there's a lot of players that have a longer upper arm than a lower arm, so that they're going to come in with a shallowing force, right? Center to rear post, they're going to be working more neutral to getting more to the right side, which allows them to shallow in a different way. Creating stance width is a shallowing force because you're going from one leg to another, so it's going to create a shallowing force versus a narrower stance. Closed stance lines, under and side under fold patterns, those are going to be a shallowing force because they're taking it back more inside, coming in a little shallower with a delay. And a lot of external rotation is a huge one in that shallowing force. Right? So that's why we can see stronger grips in certain players, because they have a lot of external rotation, so they actually can drop to a lower slot. That's why I think you can get away with a little stronger grip. Laterals will do that too, so you get a little stronger grip with having more laterals in your golf swing. And I call it the gag reflex. This is when the golf club gets out of its slot, then, for example, a good friend of mine, Heath Slocum, Heath's longer in his upper arm to lower arm. So he's shallow. He's got a ton of external rotation, and his span to height's pretty neutral, and he's an under. He's pretty predominant under. not side under, under. So he has a lot of shallowing forces, right? And the external rotation, when I put weight in the toe, because he's an under golfer, I put the weight in the toe and he hit 3 shanks in a row. And he looked at me and he said, I haven't shanked a golf ball in 15 years on a flat lie on a mat in the studio. And it just blew him away how much. So he actually needed weight in the heel because he had so many shallowing forces, he needed a steepening force. He needed something that could get him out of that, getting all jammed up and stuck, which then he had to flip his hands out, and that changed his path. That's why he shanked it. So when we put the weight in the heel, he was able to get that golf club to release better and get it so it wasn't so jammed up and stuck. So I call it the gag reflex. When you get the wrong weight distribution in a golf club into someone's hand, they get jammed up, and then they have to start chucking and tossing the head and trying to rearrange the path of the golf club, and it can create really bad impact scenarios. So grips influence a lot of where the weight needs to be. The stronger the grip, more tendency is going to be more weight in the toe. So if you have an under golfer with a stronger grip, you're probably going to talk to them about golf clubs that have more mass out in the toe, longer blade lengths. Neutral, like Tiger's so neutral. An under golfer, when they take it back, the CG of the golf club, as they take it back, like you can see a Duffey Johnson where his wrist is bowed, the face is pointing skyward. That CG is in a different position than somebody like Tiger, where it's pretty neutral, right? And a cover golfer can get even, due to their wrist action, get even more neutral too. So where that mass is, that center of gravity, and that mass in the golf club helps create these transitional forces that help release the golf club. I was working with a player out of Menelaus, Hugo Leon, and great wedge player. And he said, man, when I had the weight in the toe, I felt like the handle went up, and then I kind of had to flip at it. And when the wet mass was in the heel of the golf club, he said it felt like the handle moved closer to me, and I could really release the golf club. So it's really, really substantial what happens there. And a weak left hand to right hand scenarios will produce more covering action where you want mass more towards the heel. So that's essentially my presentation. If anybody has any more questions, we're doing a lot of studies now, trying to make as many correlations to body types, because people-shaped golfers are what we deal with every day. And hopefully this will add a little more knowledge to your toolbox, and you'll look for better tools so you can do your job easier and help your clients with their swings.
Tell them why the soul matters.
Well, the soul does matter. So if you have angles of attack being produced by weight scenarios, how the club interacts with the ground is extremely important. I was struggling with wedges, and I said, man, I'm really struggling with wedges. And he put me through a bunch of grinds that he had. And lo and behold, tons of balance helped me, allowed me to hit the ground, and allowed me to not have to try to create shallowing forces so I didn't dig, right? So the soul does matter, and it matters to where you live. So we've been making wedges since 2010, and I think we have a really strong understanding of bounce. So I didn't want this to be so much about bounce as much as it was about understanding the steering force, because that'll dictate your angle of attack, which will dictate the grind that you need, right? And then you can go into the shaft. So I'll measure someone, I'll fit them to weight, where the weight distribution needs to be. That'll dictate the angle of attack, which will dictate the grind. And then I go into the shaft, and the shaft is an important. And so we've been, because of the inability to change the weight distribution in the head, we as fitters revolve the process around the shaft. I got to lighten the shaft, or I got to make the shaft heavier, stiffer, or what have you. We're seeing dramatic changes in the type of shafts that a player plays now, because we're controlling the steering force, right? So as you control the rotational values of the golf club, now the shaft starts to take on a totally different realm. And we're doing some studies with counterweight too, and we're seeing I gained 9 yards. Neil works for me, Neil Oster. He gained 10 yards just by putting counterweight in a golf club, 30 grams in the handle, and improved his flight characteristics and everything. So we're going to marry.
Nicholas did that too.
What's that?
Nicholas did counterweighting too.
Yeah, Nicholas stumbled on it because they weighted a golf club to get swing weight correct, which that's another topic. Swing weight. What is swing weight? You know, down the road, maybe next time we'll talk about swing weight and center of gravity and things like that. How to optimize a golf club, and that's really what we're trying to do, is optimize a golf club for player performance. And as a teacher, having tools to be able to do that, so your process is vertically integrated between your instruction, the human element, and the tools that you're able to use in the process.
Incredible job, David. Incredible.
David, when do you have an online fitting system?
We will have an online wedge portal, where people can put in values of their scenarios and where they live. And
so if our people here, if they know what they are, can they reach out and get a wedge through you, or how do they?
Absolutely, or they can just call us, and we have a very strong understanding. The guys in the answering the phones have a very strong understanding of bioswing dynamics. If someone tells somebody, you know, this is what I am, then, you know, it's more about the shaft and the grind, getting that right, because you can change the weight on the golf course and see where the weight needs to be for optimum performance. Okay.
Edel.com, Edel Golf. What is it?
Just go to edelgolf.com. There's a lot of information on there. We have a lot of podcasts and videos for people to watch. And whether the steering force is in a putter or in a wedge, it all matters. And we got some cool stuff coming down the line in June. So can't really, been told not to say anything, but I think it's going to blow the industry out of the water what we present in June.
That's
very,
right.
very excited about it. So thank you for the opportunity, gentlemen.
It's great seeing you, David.
Great seeing you, David.
Right,
Fantastic information.
Right,
thank you. That is, it's amazing how profound it works. People should get their hands on the weights. You can, as you said, you can just unscrew the weights and move them around yourself, which shows a big difference.
I was amazed at the difference in where the weight was, how it changed my contact and the direction the ball went in the distance.
Direction you swung, the way the face goes. It's like putting your hands on there wrong, right? It feels that bad.
Right.
So I think Chris is lining up Mike Duffey. We had the basics of ground reaction forces yesterday. It's been a few years that we've been talking with him about this, and we're very excited to hear how he's now describing the 3 different ground reaction force profiles.
I remember what he called us earlier and said, you know, for 5 years I've been going over this thing and battling it, and says, you know, finally I realized you guys are actually right.
He's going to add some more actual science to it, but you know, it's been a really fun road with Mike, and it's nice to measure what's working.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Mike Duffey again. Thanks for joining me. We got through the first session that was really about the background, the fundamentals of forces and movement, how we create the up and down movement, how we create the side to side, but really from a basic perspective. Today we get to dig into the specifics of a swing, and then really my favorite part is we're going to go through the 3 core patterns that really people can, I'm going to say, choose from, but any good swing is going to be built on some version of these 3 patterns. And that's the pathway that sets us up to understand what belongs in one particular swing versus another. So I really hope that this is a helpful and learning experience for you. And I'm really looking forward to the question and answer session at the end. And then I hope this leads to a lot of further discussions with people that I haven't met yet, so that we can continue this discussion down the road. I will lead off with where we finished last time. Really, the goal is today to get away from that driver with a blindfold on. Most people haven't seen ground forces, and really this discussion of how to evaluate them, I don't think has been done. What do people change? What don't people change? So I think this is a great time to talk about it, a great time for all of us to learn together. And really maybe this is a chance to move instruction forward. All right, we're going to get right into creating linear and rotational movements. As a quick review, we took a look at this tool last time. It's a great little tool, especially for the golf swing. As a quick reminder, it allows us to control the three things that a golfer really can control, and that is the force created by the left leg, the force created by the right leg, or lead and trail if you prefer, and then where the center of mass of the body is. So I can increase or decrease the lead leg force. I can also change whether it's a vertical only, whether there's going to be some lateral force applied. Same thing for the trail leg force. And I can also change whether the center of mass is, as it is now, nicely centered between the 2 feet, whether it's more shifted to the lead side or more shifted toward the trail side. Going back to our more neutral position here, the way we create torques, or a force that will create rotational acceleration, is to make sure that the combined force, that yellow arrow, does not go through the center of mass. You'll notice the closer that combined yellow arrow gets to that center, the smaller the torque becomes. So right there, the center of mass and that yellow arrow are lined up. So any movement that would be created from this situation would be straight line only. There's a zero torque, so this will work to create zero rotation. So that would be a great situation for straight line movements. Golf is basically the opposite of that. We want very little straight line movement. We do want some. We want some shift and sway away and toward the target. We want some away and toward the ball. But for the most part, we want rotational movements. So what we're going to see, especially in the golf swing, are quick changes in force to create a torque on one side, and then a rapid shift in force to create a torque on the other side, and then a reset to try to get back to a zero torque position. So again, when that arrow goes through the center of mass, it can work to create a straight line motion, but anytime it's outside or away from that center of mass, it's going to create a torque, and that's going to work to create some kind of rotation around the body. So I went through a fair amount of sport and even some movie and dance examples last time. You're only going to get a couple of those, and then we're going to spend a lot of time on golf swings. But I'll use sprinting as an example of how we want to create an almost exclusively straight line motion. So again, our sprinter in this example wants to move on the screen essentially in a straight line from left to right. So he wants very little rotation. So if he could, he would create a ground reaction force that essentially went straight through from his foot about as close to the center of mass as he could. To get really into the specifics of sprint technique, very early on, he doesn't want it quite through the center of mass. You may notice that sprinters start in a very crouched down position. They lift up a little bit. They stay pretty low during the early part of the sprint and then lift up later to an almost fully upright position. That's quite intentional. Sprinters don't want to stand all the way up too early because it is a bad position for the acceleration phase in sprinting. You might wonder why, instead of having this angled upward, why doesn't he just apply a purely horizontal force to get maximum acceleration? Well, for that, we'll let Dr. Gino Torretta explain. So people may think of sprinting as just run as fast as you can, or maybe put out as much force as you can. But really, the technique of sprinting is quite important, and the relationship of where that force and where the center of mass is, that application point and orientation is really important. Now, sprinting is almost exclusively a straight line movement, so we'll switch over to look at something that's a lot more of a rotational movement in diving. We'll start with an easy example. So a lot of us have seen this particular diver probably at some point. And it's easy to tell that we've got a point of ground force application here. And we have a location of substantial center of mass somewhere over here. So that we know that there's going to be quite a bit of rotation created this way. That's easy physics. We also know that his dive score and probably his Richter scale value are both going to be about a 5.0. But that's not a very interesting dive to look at. So this first dive includes a running start and then a forward somersault. So we'll take a full look through. And then one thing I want to focus on is when the rotation actually starts. If you take a look here, her feet are still in contact with the platform. A lot of people wonder if the rotation starts after they leave the ground or before. And in case there's any doubt, and if you think back to the video you got to see of the people up in the space station, all of the energy for the rotation has to go in before the feet leave the ground. Now, the still shot doesn't show the velocity of it, but she's putting all of that rotational energy in before she leaves the ground. Now, a running start's quite different from a golf swing, so let's take a look at the next dive. This next diving example is actually, if you look at the force application, really very similar to a golf swing. So this diver is in the middle of a pre-hop. Her toes are maybe 4 inches off the platform. So she's going to come down and she's going to be in contact with that platform for about a third to half a second. That's pretty much the same amount of time we have in the golf swing to generate the power in the downswing. So let's take a look at what she's going to do. In that amount of time, she was able to create enough power to clear the platform and generate enough rotation for 3.5 full rotations. So the way she did it, she applied enough horizontal force to push her body back enough to make sure that her head would clear the platform. She created enough vertical force so that her head would stay above the platform until her body moved sideways enough to get out of the way. And finally, she made sure that combination of forces was oriented far enough away that it created a big enough torque about her center of mass that it would result in 3.5 full body rotations. All in about a third to half a second. All right, we're going to get into what I'll call the three main patterns, or there are three core patterns of ground forces. And as far as instructionally, what I'm hoping to show is that these are really the three pathways to success. They're all good. They all work equally well. Most of the players I'm showing as an example are collegiate to tour level players. You'll see all of these patterns winning on the tour. You'll see all of them missing the cut on the tour. They're all good. They all work. It's a question of matching up what the ground force pattern is with the movement pattern. And at this point, the main thing that I'm focusing on is making sure that their preferred ground force pattern matches the amount of side-to-side movement of the center of mass. Now, I talk about the center of mass a lot because I have the opportunity to measure it. Realistically, the best visual for picturing where the center of mass is it's the middle of the pelvis or right between the hips. For most golf swings, at least through the middle of the downswing, the center of mass and the center of pelvis really stay together quite nicely. So if you want to, in regular golf terms, just take a look at how much the hips are shifting, trail side, lead side, that's a perfectly good evaluation or comparison for how much the center of mass is moving toward or away from the target. So both work quite well. So I'm breaking these down into 3 primary patterns. And I'm talking about them as being trail, lead, and centered. What I want to be very clear on this is I am talking about force loading patterns. So I'll talk about somebody who is a trail load pattern or a lead load pattern. I'm not talking about post and the test that Mike and Terry do. I'm not saying they can't go together, but what I'm looking at right now is purely the ground forces and how do these players load the ground, especially in transition. If you get to see one thing about each player, take a look at the snapshot, face-on view of each of them right around club at top, right around club at parallel, and that should probably tell you what their base pattern is. So for a trail load player, what you'll notice right away is that trail side force, it is dominating the lead side force. Great. That centered player, you're probably noticing 2 things. The trail and the lead are both, they're not too far off in height, but also there's been this big unweighting. So compared to the other 2 patterns, this combined force is much lower than it would be for either of the other 2. And no surprise for a lead side or a front load pattern, the front foot, the lead foot, that force is easily dominating the trail side. So the terms aren't very hard. We're really looking at, in transition, right around top of backswing, where is the dominant force coming from? So that's how they got their names. It's a pretty simple, pretty straightforward way to keep them separate. So what I'm going to do next is go through one example swing of each of these. And I want you to know 2 things. First, there is no one perfect example of any one of these. There are variations in each player, and there are going to be trail side loaders who do some things that are a little different from some other trail side loaders. So I'm not saying that every trail side load swing has to look exactly like what I'm showing. The other thing is, these aren't 3 separate, impossible to combine patterns. In fact, I'll typically number these sort of 1, 3, and 5. And all the time I'll see somebody that shows a mix of trail and centered, and I'll call that person a 2. Right? There's some trail, there's some centered, great. Or there's somebody who shows a mix of lead and centered, and I'll call that person sort of a 4. So you can, it is a continuum. There's not a problem having a mix of 2 relatively similar patterns. Having said that, you're not going to see a successful mix of a trail pattern and a lead pattern. Those 2 are too far apart. it's a continuum. I tried to pick sort of 3 very distinct examples to give you an idea of what each one looks like on their own. As far as ground forces go, I've heard some people refer to them as sort of the fingerprint of a swing. And I think that might be kind of a fun analogy. There are 3 basic common moves that will happen in every golf swing. But beyond that, the subtle differences are really what makes up each person's swing. And they're really the best things to look at. That's what makes this so much fun. So we'll work through all those. We'll start actually with the trail load pattern and work from trail load through centered and then to the lead side. All right, we're going to look through the force pattern of a trail load golfer. I'm going to play through it once at sort of a medium speed for you to get an idea of what this looks like. And then I'll turn off the skeleton so you can get a really good look of the ground forces and what's going on. Okay, the first thing to notice is how much action or how much force change is going on even before the club moves. So this player definitely has some dynamic force activation going on before the club's moving. Virtually every golfer does. Some are a little bit more noticeable. He's not even at the highest end of that scale. But it's great, especially if you're getting a capture, to make sure you try to capture 1 to 2 seconds before to understand what that golfer is using, what that golfer is doing to set up the initial movements of the swing. Okay, so I said that there were 3 things that every golf swing has, and we'll go through them in order. First is that increase in trail side load. It doesn't matter what all right. If your golf swing has the club go up on this side of the backswing, across and hits the golf ball, and finishes up on the target side, then it will have these 3 things in its pattern. First is an increase in load or vertical force on the trail side. Second is that sideways push where you'll see that combined force tilt toward the target. And third is an increase in vertical force on the lead side. Every swing is going to have those 3 components. Again, as long as the club goes up on the backswing, comes across and hits the ball at least, 150 yards, and then the club finishes on the target side. But deeper than that, there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of good ways to put together a good golf swing. So I'll turn his skeleton back on, and we'll take a look at how his pattern works for him. So early backswing, he looks just about like almost everybody else does. He loads up on his trail side. Now, if you're used to seeing this, he already has a pretty exaggerated trail side load. He's unweighted his lead side pretty well. He's a good sized trail side force. For people to look at center of pressure, that means that his center of pressure is shifted 75 or 80% toward the trail side. So that'd be considered a pretty substantial center of pressure shift. I'll be honest, I almost never look at center of pressure shift because I get so much information out of the forces themselves that center of pressure is just something I look right past. But I understand that people use that as a quick measure of relative force size. All right. Now we'll take him up to late backswing. We'll notice that he is still very nicely loaded on the trail side. And we'll take him to that top position that we saw. And this is where we really get to see that trail load signature. He is still heavily loaded on the trail side. He has a good push from that side. And the key to making this pattern work, if you notice, is not only does he have the combined force arrow going underneath or to the target side of his center of mass, he actually has that trail foot force on that side as well. Now this one can be under it or actually going through it. That one's not quite as important. But what this tells us is he's able to use that foot force well to create a positive downswing torque. So for him, this pattern's working great. He knows how to use this to create the downswing rotation that he's about to pour into. I think his swing speed was about upwards 115, 118. So that's the key for him, that we know he's doing this pattern well. So I'm going to play through slowly now. We'll see he's still loaded, relatively medium unweighting. His force arrows never really drop down particularly low. And now we're going to see, finally, he's in his downswing. And I think at this point now, we're going to see sort of that 50-50. Well, it's a little bit more. Right there is finally his 50-50 position for his center of pressure. So that's a late center of pressure transition. For people that like center of pressure transition and think that it should happen early, forcing that change on this golfer would be a terrible idea. He is doing a great job of loading his trail side, of staying on his trail side, and applying that trail side force exactly the way he should to create downswing rotation. This is a great pattern for him. So he'll finish, he'll drive on the lead side. He gets there late, but he does a good job with it. So at club parallel, that combined ground force arrow, that yellow one, goes through the center of mass. The torque goes to 0. We've stopped putting energy into the downswing. The power production phase is over, and now it's just time to line up for impact. Okay, now we've switched over to a centered load pattern. So we'll take a look through this golfer. And again, I'm going to play through the whole swing first, let you take a look at it, and then I'll break it down a little more slowly. So you'll notice the early backswings for both, in fact, for all three, are relatively similar. First sort of quarter of backswing, again, everybody loads, center of pressure shifts to the trail side, so everybody starts about the same. A centered pattern will again have a pretty noticeable trail side shift most of the time. To be honest, this golfer may have a little bit more than his average for a centered pattern. Like I said, there is no perfect example, but it's a pretty full pressure shift to that side. So loads up on that side, and then by mid backswing or late backswing, this is where we see a departure from that that trail load pattern and that centered load pattern. That trail load pattern, that golfer loves his right leg. He stays loaded up on that all the way, or just about all the way through the end of the backswing. Centered golfers are different. By late backswing, maybe 2/3 of backswing, they're already saying, I'm ready to start unweighting, and I'm going to start shifting toward my lead side. So you can see that unweighting's happening there, and that shift is happening there while that club is still going back. Now, centered golfers, centered load pattern golfers, they have the easiest time with that squat and spring, with that lower and lift type pattern that you see in the pelvis. We may get into this later, but it's the best force pattern to accommodate that kind of visual movement pattern. But getting back to the force pattern of the golf swing, so the early load pattern looks pretty similar, but by mid-late backswing, we're going to start to see that unweighting, and certainly by the actual transition, that force, that center pressure is coming over, and centered load pattern golfers will be seeing an increase in the lead side. Then by early downswing, they're already well to the lead side. They're pushing hard with the lead side much earlier than a trail load. And then what we'll notice here is centered golfers in the downswing, they tend to maintain a little more right leg push or trail leg push than other patterns. We saw that in the backswing, certainly, with a trail load pattern. But here we're seeing it in the downswing. It's a pretty athletic move. And again, you'll notice this arrow is staying even with or just under the center of mass. So again, he's using it in a way that he is creating downswing rotational energy. So that is a good push from the right leg in the downswing. If that arrow were pushing straight up, and I'll show you this with our torque tool in a little bit, he'd be killing downswing energy. So we don't want that. Centered golfers, they are often able to push with both legs. And the way you know that it's working is that this force is being applied through or under that center of mass. Because they are using both legs pretty actively through transition and mid downswing, you tend to see the highest combined vertical forces from a centered load pattern. All right, we'll take him through, finish there, and that's a pretty standard centered load golf swing. All right, and our final loading pattern is the front load pattern. And I want to take a moment to talk about our golf club here. You may have noticed that we've got an actual graphic golf club for the other two players, and this one gets the white stick. Unfortunately, when this player was sent through, the digital graphic that includes the club didn't come along, and we couldn't create a new one. So instead of being able to put that in, or even going old school with a hickory, I decided for Terry that I dig out a digital white oak stick to make it fun for play. So Terry, that's for you. Good luck playing with that. This is not, by the way, Terry's swing. We'll go back to beginning of the swing. And again, just like the others, I'll play it through just to let you take a look, and then we'll talk about the differences in this pattern. All right. Very early, just like the others, we see that increase in trail side. Because the ground force arrows are hidden a little bit more by his club, we'll rely on the center of pressure where that bottom arrow is. So we do have a center of pressure shift. We do have an increase in loading on the trail side. Everybody has to do that to lift the arms and lift the club on that side. It's just physics. But you'll notice that all right, so we've gotten to arm parallel, and that is shifting toward the target already. So one of the hallmarks of a lead load pattern is a milder shift in pressure or a lower peak trail foot force and a much earlier initiation of increasing the lead side or an earlier center of pressure shift toward the lead side. And one of the things you'll notice the most with this kind of player, with so little pelvis and mass shift to the trail side, which you'll almost always see, there's very little tilt of the combined arrow. There's still some. Everybody will have some because there's going to be some movement toward the target. There's very little. Like I said about the trail load pattern golfer, if you try to get that person to have an early center of pressure shift to the lead side, you'll ruin the swing. This is not the pattern where you want to have a big lateral force addition to the swing. It is not meant for this kind of swing. It will completely ruin the balance of the swing. At best, you'll just suck out some power and the player will resolve how to maintain balance. So we'll continue on through. Continues to load more, load more, load more. And so one thing you should notice right here is we're well into downswing. And that combined force arrow is still wonderfully up and down. For the other two force patterns, because they had a much more substantial push from the trail side to the lead side, they had to put the sideways brakes on. This golfer didn't. So that force arrow gets to stay up nice and straight, which means that gap between the center of mass and the force arrow stays open longer. So that's one of the advantages of this swing style is you get to maintain a positive torque just by not having to put on the brakes. Eventually, just around club parallel, torque goes to 0 and we line up for impact and the swing finishes. So again, all three patterns are very nicely workable. All have their own unique benefits, things they take advantage of. All have things that they don't take advantage of and really can't because of how they're designed. What we'll do next is talk about the things that you see in each of them. Okay, so we talked about a little bit of this. Let's go through it with a little more detail. The trail loading pattern. You're going to see a much larger lateral force being applied, and it's applied for a much longer phase throughout the backswing and transition. And that will help the combined force arrow stay below the center of mass. You will see a much larger vertical force from the trail foot, and it's going to be applied very late in the backswing, which for those that look at center of pressure means that there's going to be a very late, compared to other swings, center of pressure shift over to the lead side. Now, one of the things that'll result in is what you might think of as a late but narrow and steep lead vertical force profile. Because that player stays loaded on the trail side so long, by definition, that means the player gets over to the lead side later. So it ramps up fast, but it's a little later than you would see in a centered or certainly in a front load pattern. And the other thing that I mentioned is that lead force, that overall arrow, it is going to angle back toward the center of mass more than, say, a front load pattern. All right, the centered load pattern. Again, you still have a noticeable trail side load in the backswing. While you're still in the backswing, you will start to see the vertical forces shift, and at the same time, you're going to see that big, for some players, but the most noticeable unweighting, meaning both vertical force arrows are going to go down. They're going to get smaller. Typically, this force pattern results in the greatest combined vertical force. You may see the most lead vertical force as well. I want to be careful with this, though, because in reality, across all these patterns, you'll find front load pattern people that are big force producers and some that are small force producers. Same thing with centered and same thing with trail. So it's kind of a dangerous thing to refer to centered load patterns as the biggest force producers. What I'm saying is that if you have someone that is between a couple patterns, typically for a given person, this one would likely result for that person in the greatest combined force patterns. But realistically, and I think Mike and Terry can talk about this the most, what's probably going to result in the best force profile, maybe the biggest force output, is finding the one that they do the best. So that should be, hopefully that'll be a topic we get to discuss in the Q&A. And going from a kinematics perspective, this is the force pattern that's most likely to be underneath, so to speak, that visual squat and spring type golf swing. And finally, the front load pattern. Now you only see a very medium trail side vertical force bump or vertical force increase. If you prefer looking at the center pressure shift, it's the mildest center of pressure shift. You see the smallest lateral force, or the least tilt, or the most upright arrows of all three. Sometimes when I see these, when I see front load patterns, I refer to the three arrows kind of looking as trees, where they kind of bend and sway a little bit, but for the most part, they really stay pretty upright. Whereas, especially in a centered pattern, I mean, they'll lay down 45 degrees or more. A lead side or front side load pattern, but they really like upright arrows. The transition toward the lead side, especially in the vertical force, happens while you're still in the backswing. Again, if you like the center pressure shift, that's what's happening still in the backswing. You will see a longer, flatter, wider, so to speak, vertical force profile. Flip side of that is you probably see a lower peak vertical force profile, but I want to comment that people get a little too caught up in the peak vertical numbers. The lead side vertical force pattern for a trail load player will probably look skinnier, steeper, and sharper. And there's a good chance that it'll have a higher peak value for the same player. But that doesn't mean it's better. If we're talking about driving a car, what that means is that player got on one exit later and had to hit the gas even harder to get up to full speed. A front load player is just getting there earlier and has more time to hit the gas. So the real answer to speed is how much force you're applying times the amount of time you have to apply it. It's great if you have more time. In this case, a front load pattern, that player gets to the lead side earlier, so that frontal plane torque gets positive earlier. That's how that player takes advantage of physics. It's a great strategy. None of these strategies are inherently better or worse. It's a question of which one that player is able to use well. So again, there are different advantages for each of these loading patterns. There are different things that each player can take advantage of to end up creating the same amount of speed. Again, the most important key for all of this, and the things that's going to determine whether that force pattern is going to work, goes all the way back to the video I showed of our friend who was having an unfortunate time trying to walk up and down the sidewalk. The success of these ground force patterns is entirely dependent on having the center of mass in the correct location for the forces we're trying to apply. If it's in the right place, we're going to create the right amount of linear movement and the right amount of rotation. But if the center of mass is in the wrong place, all of a sudden it's creating extra torque or not enough torque or too much linear motion. And instead of creating a great golf swing, we're creating an imbalance that we need to spend time correcting instead of swinging the golf club. So at this point, I want to switch off from slides and discussion and switch it over to going through a couple swings that have examples of some mismatches between what they're trying to do in the ground and what their bodies were doing, and then continue on to discussion. So we have two, I think, great other example swings to look through as we move on to the discussion part. And I think these will become pretty easy to identify. So I want you to look at this snapshot of his ground force pattern. He's right at the top of backswing. You can see big trail side loading. He's got the combined force arrows just about under his center of mass. His trail side isn't, but of the three patterns, certainly it's looking like he is a trail side load of the three. Now I'm going to back up and show you the interesting pathway that he took to get there. So he's at address here, and we'll see. All right, so right there is club, right there, club parallel. So nice bump to the trail side. Trail side loading is happening. Things seem quite nice so far. And then something interesting happens. You can see that vertical force starts decreasing. And it's coming over already. So it's in a bit of an unweighting. So, and he's just past club vertical here. So this unweighting in this phase right here would normally tell me this is kind of a centered pattern. But then we go, okay, continue on, and then things completely fall apart. And it comes way back over here. And there we are, top of backswing. So what happened is he started with a trail or center load pattern. They're very similar at the beginning. And bottom line, he wants to be a trail load pattern. The problem for him is he was coached out of it. So he was taught a reduced, and this is after high school, after college, he was taught a reduced sway pattern. So if he had tried to complete his trail load pattern with that big right side load and big right side arrow, he knows that he would have gone flying toward the target because his center of mass was out of place. He did not have enough shift away to maintain that force pattern. So what he did is essentially shut down his force pattern, waited until the time in his swing when he could have that, and then turned it back on. So internally, he knew the pattern he wanted. He knew what he was good at doing. He just had to turn it off and wait to turn it back on. But by then it was so late in the swing that he really couldn't put much together to finish it off. So that was a problem of he wanted his center of mass to be farther away from the target. It wasn't there. So you had to wait for it to get back in the right position for him to finish his swing. So that's a case of he really is a trail load player. That's what his ground forces want to do. His body, he was taught to do something else with his body. And once he finishes getting back to free movement upstairs, he'll have a nice match between the two. Okay, second great pattern to look at. Another one of my favorites here. So I'm not going to tell you quite where we are on the swing here, but I want you to take a look at the pattern and see if you can guess sort of what this looks like for you as far as which one of the force patterns you think this would be. So I'll play it through. So we can see it shifting over. Little bit of tilt. Not a lot, but a little. We've got some good lead side. We've got a pretty vertical arrow going on there. And we'll actually, I'll even take this to, wow. There's impact, which is quite impressive. We don't usually see people still foot on the gas at impact. If you're guessing front, maybe front and center, I think that's a great pick. There's a little bit of unweighting in there. Let me back this up. He has a bunch of some other interesting things in there. So I'm going to go back in here and I'll play it through and then explain where this pattern came from. Okay. Okay, so looking at the whole swing, we see bump to the trail side. It looks like a pretty good one there. And we've got this descent, push, and then we see what you got to see before. But let's go back. So a trail side load would still be over there and pushing. Doesn't quite seem like that. Centered load, there should be more of an unweighting. Front side load, we get that really vertical arrow position in the downswing. That seems most likely. Now, this goes beyond what the conversation was for today, but I'm going to show you an extra piece here and why I started it. So let's go. So the other thing that should be happening is these arrows should be pushing forward and back. So you can see that V created by the blue and green arrows there. That's what is going to create the pelvis rotation. So we see that really get going. Let's see. We're about here that's really going. But if you take a look at where he is in the swing, that should have happened by a little bit past arm parallel at the latest in the backswing. And we can see he's way past there. He's just about starting his downswing when he decides, I really want to get my hips going. If we look from here on out, it really is a wonderful lead side or front load pattern. This golfer got in his head that he did not like the idea of a specifically named front shift teaching or swing style. And so he just believed that he shouldn't do it. Unfortunately, he forgot to tell his body that he didn't believe in it, because his force pattern is perfectly suited for that swing style. He does a wonderful job of it. So essentially what he's doing is he's waiting a little bit into the downswing to really turn on the forces that his body knows how to create. He's added an artificial bump to the trail side. He waits until he comes back, and then he does his actual golf swing. So again, we've got a mismatch of what he thinks his upper body should do, so he's attached that on. But really, he's putting lipstick on a pig. He has otherwise very nice ground forces. He should make sure that he allows his body movement to match up with the forces that he creates really well. So I'll stop with that example, and we'll switch over to discussion time, and look forward to hearing some questions.
Lipstick on a pig, Mike. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
That's gold.
That is gold.
He fake shifts to the right, and then he waits until his body's ready to say, oh, okay, now I can do my real golf swing. It's so good.
But we see a lot of that.
I'm just looking at the quote that I think I sent to you. People early on when they learn the patterns, right, they're like, well, can I do the other one? I mean, think about, no, it's like you being left-handed or right-handed. It's probably better that you do the one that you're good at, is really kind of what he just said, which I love. Mike, he had a few just killer lines in there. Thanks so much. I think that was such an incredible presentation.
Yeah, and I don't mean that as an insult to pigs. That, you could be a prize-winning pig. He has a wonderful pattern, just this extra kind of crap thrown on the front that wasn't doing him any good. So he had to wait until that cleared, and then he could do what he was really good at. It was just so late in the swing that, anyway.
By the way, this is going to be an article in Golf Magazine that Mike and Terry and I are doing. And it's going to be pretty exciting. And it's going to be also in our new book. So Mike, you've convinced us. We will quit going with post and go with load.
Yeah, we're going to change out.
Yeah, I don't want to, both are important. So I want to make sure people understand that this is the force pattern in the swing. The movement that's happening up top and how they turn. I think Terry, maybe it was yesterday that you were talking about, how they pivot at the hips is another piece. So I want to make sure that, how they kinematically turn is an important thing to talk about. I just want to make sure people understand what I'm talking about is the the force pattern. So I'm talking about the loading pattern. That's
Yeah, the reason the
Mike,
reason
I
I
like force
said
pattern.
that yesterday, yeah, the reason I said that yesterday is to clarify the difference between the post test and the load profile. Is someone asked a question about how they can see our test better, and I used your example, which we ended up not going with, but I think when someone's looking at the way we test, it's a good way to see it. It doesn't necessarily translate into actual rotation of the golf swing. It was just a post-test example. The one I was using was faster left hip, faster right hip, and the hips together. That's just for the post-test. So just to clarify.
Yep.
So let's see what we got here. Q&A. Mike, you got any questions for Mike?
Which Mike asking Mike?
I'm
excited with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited about that presentation, Mike. It's incredible.
Much
Pierre
better than the
had
first time, 2 times you and I did it together.
it's I mean, this has been, I was trying to guess yesterday how long, but
5
I
years.
almost don't want to know. Okay.
It's 5
Yeah,
years.
Well, you guys did the presentation of the first version at the Top 100 conference, which was about 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, we did another one
And
too.
that wasn't anywhere near as good as this one.
It's
More
evolved.
metaphors and less conclusions.
Yeah. And there's still a lot. I mean, people, I still get a lot of questions. And this is, I really think this is the first time that you've, well, it's come far enough to throw it into this presentation this thoroughly. There's still more to do. The question I get all the time is, well, how do we see it without force plates? And
Sports box.
we could, the next hour could be sports box. We won't do that because Phil's next, right? So
he's we're gonna put him on in a bit.
yeah.
I have a question for you from the audience. Can you talk about unweighting generally, and then specifically for the 3 styles?
Yeah. If I can speak generally if you want to narrow some things
generally
down. So unweighting's a neat strategy. It's a way of reducing force, and if you do it right, it actually increases the power input, so to speak. If you combine it at the right time, what happens is you can increase that moment arm that I was talking about a little bit. So essentially what happens, and there's a phrase that I'll use in sort of the applied part of instruction, that when we're talking about the linear movements, you have to make room for the linear movements to apply those forces that you want to create the torques. So when you want to create a vertical force, that's going to create lift in the swing. So the person's going to move up. So you have to create room for that lift. In the most basic version is you can start lower, or you can have a descent during the swing. And you guys should talk about how to put that in a swing. You can start lower, or you can do it.
But we use
gradually.
it like a diesel engine or a jet engine. It's like somebody's force is very late, then getting them lower early gives them a chance to get up in time. If somebody's like Rory McIlroy, then they can use it a little bit more dynamically over a shorter period of time. So I don't know. That's sort of what we do.
Yeah, a trail load pattern actually has a slower one where they're loaded up, and I'll say sort of generally they kind of fall from the trail side to the lead side. A centered load pattern, a true one, really does kind of drop down in the middle and then spring back up. And that's the most visible version that people kind of recognize on video. So there are different versions of it, but it's a low force point in time. I'll say, I don't want to say moment because that's a torque moment thing, but it's a low force point in time. It's actually a way of increasing the power input. So nice little move. So, and it makes room for what you need to do in the swing.
Very cool. Mike, you got any questions? I think we got to move along here, unfortunately.
I'm pretty excited about what, I'm glad that after 5 years that you've committed to saying something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Research has shown.
Was the fence getting a little uncomfortable?
Well, there were some splinters, but kind of like, well, actually, I'll use this to talk about David's presentation for a minute. His stuff is, he brought a good pile of data, and it'd have been great to be able to. He had about 35 golfers in there. It'd have been great to be able to say, well, this is how it works across the whole group of them. But realistically, with 3 weights and the amount of the differences across all golfers, there just wasn't enough to say how it's going to affect everyone as a big discussion. But man, the changes that it's creating within golfers it's like trying to get a suntan at 8 in the morning, 11 in the morning, and 2 in the afternoon. I mean, it's just amazing how much difference there is for a given golfer. So yeah, I really take my time to make broad statements. So yeah, we're several years in, but the picture's that clear that here we are.
Awesome.
Very cool. Well, we're pushing along. We got a lot of content still to squeeze
Mike,
in.
you're
Mike,
no longer Dr. No. Now you're Dr. In the Know.
That's exactly right. That was our nickname for 4 years.
I'll stick with Dr. Slow. That's fine.
No.
You're definitely
good.
Dr. Slow, but you've lost Dr. No.
Well, let's time for Dr. Phil, right?
Yep. You did a great job today, Mike.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Yeah,
a
we're
lot.
really grateful for the work and really well explained. Great stuff. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I appreciate getting to join you. All right, and I'll say goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks, Mike. All the
Bye-bye.
best. So, basically, Mike, I did a lesson yesterday that I sort of commentated as I did it.
What we talked
we were
about.
discussing discussing the metaphor of the race car. So you line the wheels up first, and then which is all the things to do with openers and closers and kind of path shifters, and then talked about the kind of swivel, kind of tilt being the sort of the transmission. It's how we get the energy up and down the body from the hands to the feet, and then obviously putting the engine in and starting to push into the ground to get the speed out. So
You're on the gas.
yeah, so I've got about a 20-minute lesson here with a good young player from Brazil who's hitting massive hooks before this, and within just, I don't know, probably hit about 10 balls. It's in it dead straight and 15 yards longer, so it's kind of cool.
All right, so I got my man Daniel here, who is a really good player. How many years you play for Brazil?
21.
21 years playing for Brazil, right? You look like you're 21. Yeah, but now you started teaching, so we're talking about how to teach, and I thought, we're going to make this video here, sort of talking through teaching, which is good for you and good for other teachers. Eventually we want to add speed. That's kind of the theme that we're talking about. But in order to add speed, you have to go through a teaching sequence. And the metaphor we use is like trying to tune a racing car. And when you're trying to get a racing car to go faster, obviously most people will go, what do? You put a bigger engine in, right? But if the wheels aren't pointing in the right direction and the transmission can't sort of handle the load, then it's not going to work. So the first thing we do is we test you, and then we work out from the testing, how do we get you hitting it straighter? How do we get your wheels aligned? Because then the power you put into the swing, gets delivered onto the road, right? And so the first thing we did, we already did this, but we'll go through it again. So put your hands together like this, just turn a little bit, swing your arms up to the right. So we can see, when Daniel swings his arm up to the right, this obviously goes back a lot. Now, in order to get some buy-in, I could just tell you now, grip it weaker and you'd be like, oh, I changed my grip. So it's a lot easier to get buy-in if you now take your normal grip, take your left hand off, and swing the club. What happens to the club face? Shuts a lot, right? So let's move the hand over so it's a lot weaker, and then do the same thing. How does that feel?
More stable.
More stable, right? So stable is the right word, or badly used as the word quiet. So let's talk about lining the wheels up, right? So if you grip it too strong and the face shuts, it's like having one of your wheels on your car pointing in the wrong direction. Now, the way that golf instruction usually works is that they say, well, surely I can grip it like this and just hold it off, for example, right? And that would be like pointing all of your wheels in the wrong direction and saying, you know what, we'll point all of them in the wrong direction and just, steer to the right the whole time. And so it's true that you would potentially, stay on the road, but you wear your body out, you blow the car out, and you really wouldn't be able to put any speed on it because you're having to use all your muscles. So it's a really good sort of metaphor. So ideally we get you to let the plane go over. So go ahead and do it again. Just kind of get a sense of, so we call this a calibration drill. Get a sense of which right hand position is best for you. So take the left hand off, leave the right hand over belt. And just sort of baby swings, just, every time you go to play golf, you got to get a sense of what kind of, hand position and elbow position do I need, so that I don't really have to sort of offset the steering. And then, so if you put your hand out like this, so this is our friend Thor, his grip is side on, right? So that's his arm position. Somebody who grips it stronger, the elbow goes under like this. So it's not just the hand. So if you have it under elbow and you move your hand, it's no good. So we actually need to move the elbow up like this. And that's what Ben Hogan did. So as your hand comes over, your arm has to come off your body, because this is another wheel on the car, right? So if I'm too much this way, this is a wheel pointing over there. So it's actually a left effect. This is a wheel pointing over there. And we're sort of shakily staying on the road. Now, if we move our hand, we also have to move the elbow, and that's like both of the front wheels pointing in the right direction. So just go ahead and do this drill for me. So getting the wheels lined up is a gigantic piece of hitting it straighter, and hitting it straighter that lets you put more power in. So lift the club up in front of you, so it's just standing up straight. Elbows relax next to your side. So your elbows separate like this. So be careful not to tuck this one in. So people that have gripped it too strong for a long period of time, they always want to keep this elbow in, because that was how they stopped hooking it. But let's get the elbows apart. In your case, let's just test your left hand real quick so we can put both hands on there correctly. Come in here. Push, the box using your hips.
No grip?
Yeah, new grip. So use your hips to push. What does that face do? It's pretty straight, right?
It is.
So we already did this yesterday, so we needed a little bit stronger left hand to fix that. So you got stronger left, weaker right. That's it. Look at me. Because of your history of having a strong grip, you have to pull your arms in this way, relax. So you already got your arm on there, it's locked out. That's too difficult. So we're not even getting to the grip yet. We're talking about a theoretical best way of gripping, which is pull the club into your belly first before you grip it, then put your hands on the club. So now it's really easy to put your hands in the right way because your elbows are relaxed. So most people, they're trying to do this, it doesn't work. So soft elbows, hands twist towards each other, and with the club pointing in the middle, you can just drop it straight down. And that basically is, so that's still under. So now it's stiff. You see how that works? Watch this. So do it again. I know, but it isn't actually that hard. The problem is, look where you're taking your grip. So you understand this is a teaching process, right? So I've trying to explain to you to take your grip here. You've already got your hands on the club down here. So you can bypass that. So you can go like this, soften your elbows, and then take your grip. So then this elbow will be more out. That's it. It's just, yeah. If you hold your arms out like this and take your grip, you're in trouble. So soft, drop it straight down. That's it. And then make sure the face is square. So let's do it again. Put the glove up in front of you, point to the camera, straight face, hands on top, soft elbows, and drop it down. Now you got good grip. So as a teacher, part of the problem we have in trying to line the wheels up is if I'm usually here, right? And then you leave it there and you try and move your arm, it doesn't work. Like you took your grip exactly the right way for your old grip. The new way has to be neutral shaft, square face, soft elbows, twist the hands towards each other. Make sure the face is straight. Right hand over more, elbows soft, and then drop it down. So it should be straight, right? So that should, so look at us. That's mine. So now, so that's going to have a right effect on your shots to start with, right? So let's just hit some soft shots. The first thing we need to do is learn how to put the hands on the club and the arms on the club in a way that is quite consistent. That's it. Perfect. That's it. And now the second thing is just to sort of hit some really easy shots so that you can get used to it. We don't want to put too much pressure on your swing right now because we're really just still learning how to put your hands on the club. So maybe we'll hit 15 balls just doing this. The difficulty of the shot is just to make you sort of integrate putting the hands on the club into the process. That's it. Relax your elbows a little bit. There you go. Perfect. And just hit a few. Perfect. Now, I know you're a good player. We did this a little bit yesterday. So we'll skip to the next thing. So, I have a saying, hookers always hook and slicers always slice. So, you know, as a hooker, somebody, you know, had a grip that was too strong. Your ball tended to curve too much. And, you know, so what happens is, if you think about how a golfer reacts, what do they do when they don't want to hook it? They, you know, they hang back and hold on, right? So we had a little bit too much hold on with you. Now the ironic thing is, in order to understand club path, saw that video of Hogan I sent you, right? So when you look at like a, you know, launch monitor, it's measuring the direction the club is moving at impact. Now people feel, you know, that this is allowing the club, you know, when they drag the handle, it feels like the club's going to the inside. But if you look at it, it actually pushes the club more to the outside. So that even though you feel like you're stopping yourself hooking it, the way the side bend works, it makes the club work out to the right more. And what we need to do is what we did earlier today is put the club in your belly. You actually need to release it. So if I release that properly, as I keep going, the club goes around the corner, right? And that was that sort of, that Ben Hogan look. And so for you, you actually needed to release it earlier in order for your path to stop going to the right. So it's kind of a story here. Still talking about aiming the wheels. You know, we fixed your grip, which took away the face left, but we needed to release it better so that the arm would extend and the shoulder would work around so that your path would go more to the left. And we had different ways of feeling that. Firstly is understanding releasing makes the head go more left, which is what slicers do. Slicers always slice. They release early. They don't really use their body. So they made a couple of feels. Take the ball in your right hand. So you should cover golfer, so you need the ball to bounce there. Swing your arm back, throw it, bounce it there, and sort of send it towards the target. And you feel how your right shoulder goes through there. That's it. It doesn't hang back and hold on. You're releasing, and then as you release, your right shoulder comes around the corner, right? Another metaphor we used was throwing like a discus, right? So get your hand on top of the discus, you throw with your right hand, and the right shoulder goes through towards the target. This spine angle is a gigantic piece that contributes to path. So grip is really important path, but so is side bend, right? If I hang back, my path is going to the right. I'm still going to hook it. So by doing those drills, you sort of realize that you should be, you know, releasing, right? And then allowing the sort of the right shoulder to work around or have some speed in your chest or whatever. So those are matchups. So let's just get the grip on there properly. That's it. And then go ahead and make sure you release it and let the pivot go with the body, with the club. That's really good. It's a lot straighter, isn't it?
Way straighter.
So what do you feel in comparison to 24 hours ago when that was?
The club is more in front of me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm trying to release. That's a weird part. Because
Yeah.
I'm trying to release and the ball's not going left.
Right. So the transmission of the car is, you know, how we get the power from the road or from the engine to the road, right? So we go, steering has been fixed. Now the transmission there's three pivots that we see. So if somebody has a stronger grip, look at this, it's kind of a steering wheel effect. So the effect of the grip on the golf swing is like a steering wheel. So if you have a strong grip, you turn the steering wheel to the right, that gets your upper body behind the ball, right? That's exactly right. Now, as a more of a on-top golfer, as you turn back, you turn the steering wheel to the left. And what happens is it keeps you more on top of the ball, right? So do a couple of those. Just feel the steering wheel turns so you can feel more on top of the ball. So that's what we call a counter tilt. So people with weaker trail hands, as they go back, this arm stays more on top of the club, and the upper body sways back more on top of the lower body. The stronger the grip is, it gets more behind the ball. So even with a good grip, if you're behind the ball too much, you swing out to the right. So just hit a couple. This is sort of the transmission. It's how we are going to be able to use the lower body once we get the grip right. Good. So that's the counter tilt. Now, so let's move into increasing your power, right? So basically we've gone from aiming the wheels, making sure the transmission's organized, and now we're going to talk about using the ground. So just put your hands across your chest first. So the first thing to understand is as we turn back, so now the first move in the down, well, late in the backswing actually, is you come diagonally onto the ball of the foot. Don't fall over. That's it. So do it again. So the feeling Mike uses, I like a lot. Buckle onto the ball of the left foot. That's it. Perfect. So that sets us up to rotate through the ball, because left leg has a big contribution to the rotation. If I can get my pressure diagonally over here, now when I push back, it clears the left hip. So feel that. That's it. And now push with the left leg, clear the hips. That's it. Perfect. Now, one of the ways I like to teach that is to put the club across the hips like this. Hold it on your hips with your thumbs. Look at me. It's like this. That's it. Perfect. So turn back, belt buckle to the ball of the left foot, and then hit me with the end of the club. That's it. Perfect. You feel how that also makes you come up a little bit? We have to allow ourselves to come up. That's right. So go ahead, turn back, belt buckle, turn through, come up. That's it. Let's do it a little bit faster. So now we actually have to refer back to our steering wheel, because the faster you rotate through and the more you come up, it's actually a face opener. So you're going to have to now, you remember the good shots you're hitting are a lot straighter. There's still a tiny bit of draw, right? So let's put it together. Let's do some practice swings. Just get some, baby swings to start with. Just getting load. That's it. Release. That's it. Do it again. Let's hit 5 practice swings first. Just want to see your release timing. So you still got to release it early. Belt buckle. So now it's like a release and turn after you load, right? Perfect. Let's do it. Let's go. So good.
Feels faster.
Feels faster, right? It was really good. Now, if you wanted to break that down into 2 pieces, you did a really good job there, because you did a really good load and release. But a lot of people, they'll leave behind at that point because they're thinking about their legs. So what you can do is you can alternate maybe 1 or 2 balls. So as your body gets faster, it's like walking. You speed your arms up, your legs go faster. Slow your arms down, legs go slower. Some people don't quite get that because they're thinking too, locally on a piece of the body. So go ahead and put your feet together like this, and then just hit one pretty much as far as you can, just feeling like your arms speed up. Perfect. That's it. Now do some practice swings so we can separate these in order to put them back together again. Actually, let's do this again. So turn back, lower and onto the front leg. That's it. Now rotate through and let yourself come up all the way. So as you're coming up, let both legs straighten. Perfect. There you go. Let's now put the feeling of the arm speed and the pivot together. That is so good. That was crushed. Right? Really good. Good job. So now people ask us, can you talk about bad players? So we've basically gone through like 4 or 5 sections of a lesson there. Each of those pieces might be one lesson, right? And it might take someone 2 months. Usually takes about 20 minutes. But if they lose, in trying to get the lower body, they lose their arm swing and the ball starts push hooking, then you have to go back to step 1, right? The lesson could be a practice program, right? So you could,
You will be.
basically you put out, you can put out 5 balls, for example, and, let's say that I would consider a successful lesson, right? The ball's going straighter, it's more solid, and it's going further. But now let's say we have a lesson once a week or something. We potentially could do the same program, right? We just go, okay, let's check the grip for 5 balls, just go through your grip routine. Nice and easy, get used to putting your hands on the club properly. Do some kind of training so we can fix the path. So the hands fix the face, throwing and right arm onlys, pointing the club back into your belly, doing the split-handed, all of that fixed sort of the swing direction. You could do the right path. It's really fixes swing direction and counter tilt. And then you can do some lower body drills to switch yourself, and then you put it all together. And so, in filming a lesson, you actually can, give somebody the opportunity to do the lesson in that sequence again. If they late, you just bring them back to where they started. And that's how you teach them this too. Good job. Thanks for your help.
Appreciate it.
So Mike, I made that just to sort of summarize the theme of the whole thing, making sure that we, line the wheels up.
If anybody
connect
comes
the
and
upper body
watches
and
you
lower
or me
body.
give a golf lesson, it's pretty much what we do every time.
There's only about 5 balls actually, so I did a lot of practice swings there. So Mike, what do you? We're going to close out. We've got too much content, and we're going to send out the second Phil Cheatham video and some other videos, and we're going to save the Q&A when we get everyone together. Mike and I are going to be together at the weekend, so we're going to try and film a final Q&A, which gives people that haven't watched it live the opportunity to ask some questions. So everybody needs to send us some questions. We'll do the Q&A at the weekend. And so any final thoughts to sort of summarize, what happened this last 2 weeks here, Mike?
Yeah. Always measure, never guess. As long as you're measuring, it's going to give you the information on how to start with a student. I mean, you do a diagnostic when you take your car in or you go see a doctor. They go through and determine what the problem is, and they give you how to fix it. Well, same thing we do. We assess instead of guess, and that's why our people get better. Take the time and measure.
And then, I mean, it's like using. I mean, how did you learn to use a force plate, Mike? I mean, you've been, pretty much the biggest thought leader in how to teach using a force plate. Did someone tell you how to do it?
No, I just did it through trial and error, and then started
Right.
figuring things out, asking questions, and then once it started seeing patterns, we went to Scott Lynn, we went to Mike Duffey, we went to Phil Cheatham, we went to all of our patterns, and we asked them about it, and they went through and they investigated and found out that our observations after thousands of lessons was true.
But your great, one of your great strengths, other than you never forget anything. So you're like a human database, but is using it, right? You go for it, and like you say, the patterns appear, but the patterns don't appear if you didn't use the system. Now, the patterns don't appear if you don't test for grips. They don't appear if you don't test for posts and all the rest of it. So basically, even if you don't know the answer the first time you test, if you test every single time, then things start falling into boxes. And I think that's the sort of style that we share. And it's the same with Sportsbox. Motion capture is has now been democratized. I think there's going to be people using Sportsbox on a daily basis who don't understand it today, but because they use it every day, they're going to start to see patterns, on a frequent basis, and that's going to help everybody to get better at teaching in a different way. And then, people have used video for years. It's another type of technology, launch monitors. So doing it is the key. You're getting paid to stand out and watch people play golf. You might as well be learning at the same time. You've got free learning opportunities every day.
Make them better. Use the tools you have. I mean, between Sportsbox, force plates, launch monitors, whether it's the Quad or TrackMan video, all are phenomenal to help us to understand, what's going on. Use every measuring device that's available to you to help you diagnose what the problem is. And then once you have that, we've given you tools. Use them. Ask questions.
Yeah. So we're going to do, like I said, we're going to do Q&A later in the week, and we'll try and get as many of the presenters on it as possible. Go back, watch the videos, think about what you need from us or from the other presenters, and we'll put together a Q&A.
Today was a phenomenal
Use the
day.
tests. Every day has been great. Use the tests, use the teaching sequence. Teaching sequence is really important. Don't jump ahead until someone's ready for it. And then I actually did a lesson last week that I recorded. I just got to edit it a little bit. But we were talking about speed, and I had a girl come in who, pretty limited external shoulder rotation, under golfer, was not folding her arm correctly, and it took us an hour to get the arm to fold properly, and she hit it a lot better, but didn't gain speed, right? So it's like, and I needed to have a speed video, but it wasn't a speed lesson. It was a let's make her hit the golf ball better lesson. So so only move on to the next stage when the person is ready.
Yeah, they don't let you move to the next grade until you've graduated from the one.
Mm-hmm. So Mike, it's been a pleasure. Teaching is learning twice, and in teaching this seminar, I learned a lot and had a great time. So thanks to you and everybody else.
Well, thanks to everybody for participating. We're going to continue to do these things. The book is actually done, and we're now editing it, and it will be out probably in the next month. We have an article that we're working on for Golf Magazine with Duffey on exactly what he covered today, and we'll go a little more in depth than that. And it's going to be three months in a row, May, June, and July, and kind of exciting news.
If you don't follow Mike's Instagram, you should. It's a gold mine.
Yep.
And the gold nuggets are right there on the surface. You don't even have to dig a hole.
Yep.
I occasionally post something interesting, but Mike is relentlessly interesting. And of course,
Terry is one of the best teachers in the world.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks very much, of course, to Chris Taylor, who is in the engine room. You're going to come up and say hi, Chris. He's done an incredible job of keeping us organized and
yes, which is a tough
sort of
job
on
to do.
point. If you know Mike and I, that's like herding cats, isn't it, Chris?
Yes. Many text messages, many private chats, many late night emails. It was great.
Thank you very much. Late nights for you, so we're very grateful for your help. Thanks to Ping and Sportsbox for your support. Made it all work.
We'll have day 3 uploaded shortly and day 4 by tomorrow morning.
And we want to thank, Mike Duffey. We want to thank Sasha McKenzie. We want to thank Phil Cheatham. We want to thank David Edel. We want to thank everybody for helping us make this much, much better. Thank Dr. Kwon. Everybody, it's been a tremendous 2 weeks, and We got a lot covered. And Chris, of course, thank you.
You're more than welcome.